It was morning. Murim Middle Plan, the monastery of the heavenly demon cult. In the plaza, warriors were practicing. In one of the monastery's temples sat a gray-haired old man. He was the patriarch of the heavenly demon cult, or rather, the heavenly demon himself. The first elder of the monastic order came to the patriarch. He knelt down before him. The elder wept. He said that all 9 sects of the Orthodox and non-Orthodox had already been subjugated and asked why the patriarch was still inactive. Demon Fist leaned to the floor, saying it wasn't enough that the patriarch was a renowned master. He asked what he should do now. Sitting on the floor, Fist heard the elder ask him not to talk nonsense. The patriarch stood up and folded his hands. He said that while practicing divine arts, his body and soul had split apart, and he couldn't get his body back. Standing with his arms folded, the patriarch said it used to be fun. He could fly to the moon and stuff. At his feet cried Fist, repeating that the patriarch does not care about the monastery. Fist's behavior enraged the patriarch, who shouted for Fist to stop roaring and listen to him. The patriarch's eyes lit up, and he used his powers. Fist continued to sit up, but only squeezed his eyes shut. Turning away, the patriarch said that everything was useless, no matter how skilled he was without a physical body. Suddenly, a portal looking like a black hole appeared in front of the heavenly demon. The demon screamed. The patriarch's hand reached for the portal, stammering. He asked what it was and said he was being drawn by some unknown force. With his feet on the floor, he rested, shouting that he couldn't be sucked in so easily. Then he applied the magical technique of rock gravity, which added 6 tons. However, the portal still pulled the heavenly demon inside, and he clenched his teeth in bewilderment. And then the heavenly demon realized that the spell would not work without a physical body. Eventually, the portal sucked him in and snapped shut. The temple was silent as if nothing had happened. In dreams, people said that anyone could support them better than him, that even old people who were 90 years old had Class E, and he had what? Everyone scoffed. The dream continued with the girl screaming his name, and Hyun-soo woke up in terror and sweat. Sitting on the bed, Hyun-soo leaned over, exhaling in relief, thinking how tired he was. The year 2000 is unknown. The 12th month? 2 years ago. One day, portals to other worlds opened across the land. Monsters started coming out of these portals by the hundreds. They destroyed anything and everything in their path. Humanity went on the counterattack with the best weapons of their time. However, modern weaponry was useless against the monsters. Humanity was in danger of total annihilation. And then people began to awaken superpowers. Among them, the S-class hunters stood out, and they awakened a power of the highest power. Their weapons were effective. When the battle ended in victory, the S-class hunters gained boundless power. But what became of that 1% of people without superpowers, the so-called everyday people? Park Hyun-soo was one of them. He was 27 years old. He was a saboteur. Sitting on the bed, Hyun-soo looked at his phone, where the text message from the clinic had arrived. Discharging Hyun-dae meant condemning him to an agonizing death. Kneeling down and taking the rope, Hyun-soo thought about taking his own life. Looking at the rope, he thought it was better to die this way than to watch the last of his kin die in agony like the others. The government will take care of him if he doesn't have a guardian. Clutching the rope, Hyun-soo cried and mentally apologized to Hyun-tae. But suddenly, a bright light shone in the room, and a blue haze swirled around the young man. His face stretched out in surprise. Continuing to stand with the rope, Hyun-soo looked at the light source and saw a black portal that sucked everything into itself. Suddenly, a gray-haired man unfamiliar to him flew out of the portal. Hyun-soo didn't realize what was happening and shouted for help. The old man flew straight at him and knocked Hyun-soo to the ground. The two of them fell on the bed. Looking at the old man looming over him, Hyun-soo asked through gritted teeth who he was. But the man was surprised that the guy could see him. In fear, Hyun-soo screamed and jumped away from him to the other side of the bed against the wall. Holding his palm forward, Hyun-soo said that if the intruder came to steal from him, then he had the wrong door, because Hyun-soo was as naked as a falcon. Rising into the air and looking around the room, the sky demon asked where it was. Such tricks by the demon made Hyun-soo not delighted, but horrified. He didn't understand how it was possible. Turning to the old man, Hyun-soo asked if the hunter had come to him from the portal. But the demon didn't understand that he was called a hunter, and asked again what a hunter was. Thinking that the hunter must be some kind of food, the demon turned to the computer monitor, which became a strangely painted flashlight for him. When Demon tried to take the flashlight in his hands, they passed through him, and he complained that he was still incorporeal. Hyun-soo's eyes were full of fear. Clutching his head, Hyun-soo shouted that he realized the ghost of doom was before him. He said he had changed his mind, had a brother, and asked for mercy. Wagging his finger, Demon began to resent that he was a thief and now a ghost. He gave Hyun-soo the middle finger, but he continued to hold his head and started rocking on the bed and screaming. The demon took him by the hair and told him that he could touch him. Hyun-soo wasn't thrilled and asked him tearfully not to hit him. After scratching his beard, the demon headed for the door and walked through it. Hyun-soo asked where the stranger was going. Going straight to the city, Demon looked at the people in cars, thinking about how fast horseless carriages are nowadays. Noticing the high rises, Demon thought he had never seen such houses. It concluded that this was not the middle plan. The demon tried to stop one of the passers-by on his face, then noticed that he couldn't touch them, which meant he was only material to Hyun-soo. At this time, Hyun-soo sealed the portal in the wall with paper and duct tape. He breathed out, thinking that finally he wouldn't be intimidated by this black hole. Rubbing his chin, Hyun-soo wondered if it was a portal and reported it to the authorities. The phone rang, and Hyun-soo picked it up and heard that the hunter Kim Hak-sun was calling him. Hunter Kim said they have a situation at the portal and need a support team. Hyun-soo said he would help and would go to them immediately, inspired by the fact that he got a call from the Hunter Kim class. Hyun-soo concluded that maybe his demise was not the answer. Hyun-soo turned around and saw a hovering demon in the lotus posture who said that if a person talks to himself in their area, he is called a moron. The young man asked why the demon had returned, and he told him that he didn't really want to return to his shabby hut, but an unknown force had forced him to. Seeing Hyun-soo packing his bag, Demon asked where he was going, and the guy said he needed to get to the portal to help people. After listening, Demon said that Hyun-soo always talks about hunters and portals, but what they are. Hyun-soo couldn't believe that the old man didn't know. Hyun-soo said he had no time to explain, and if Demon didn't get out of his apartment before he returned, he would call the police. Taking the boy by the hood, Demon asked if he wanted to walk alone because the sun would be down when he got there. Hyun-soo shouted. Holding the guy by the scruff of his neck, Demon used a wing spell, and they flew upwards. One passerby noticed a guy flying in the sky and pointed him out to the other passersby. People stopped and looked at him, thinking he was the awakened one. While Demon was looking forward and Hyun-soo was hanging out somewhere below, he asked the old man to come down because people were watching. But the demon replied that they were already there and let Hyun-soo go. The guy flew down. When they landed, Hyun-soo threw up. The demon stood beside him with his hands folded behind his back and looked at him questioningly. On the bus, Hyun-soo thought that Class B portals were dangerous. His legs were shaking, but he knew that if he survived, he would have enough money to pay for the hospital. A demon looked out from the bus's roof and asked where the guy was going. Hyun-soo shrieked and startled the passenger behind him. The young man asked why the demon was still following him, but he was indignant and said that he had nowhere to go because the power returned him when he left. Demon rolled over and looked out through the roof. He said that at least now he had someone to talk to, which would relieve his boredom. Kandonggu of Ilcha Mountain. At the top of the mountain, a portal opened up. The hunters are almost there. Each supporter should take a piece of equipment. Both guys and girls participated in the support. They all took a box with their name on it and followed the squad leader. As everyone approached the portal, Hunter Kim announced that his name was Kim Han-sung, and he was in charge of the operation of this portal. Through the megaphone, Kim said that a Class B hunter, 4 Class C hunters, and 5 supports would go into the portal. Taking Iren's megaphone, the Class B hunter reminded everyone that the portal is dangerous, so battle-hardened people should keep an eye on the newcomers. Everyone was told to check their gear. While Hyun-soo was inspecting his backpack, he listened to the guy next to him tell his friend that he had only come to see Jaren. As Hyun-soo kneaded his hands, he heard someone behind him say they hadn't seen each other for a long time. He looked back. It was a Class B hunter, Choi Jun-seong. He asked Hyun-soo if he was still a supporter and if it wasn't enough for him to do what he had done in the last operation. Looking at the hunter with horror, Hyun-soo couldn't believe he was here too. After all, Jun-seong was beating people left and right. The hunter provoked people on purpose and then pretended to be joking. He once put Hyun-soo out of commission for a month. Jun-seong swung around and asked Hyun-soo what Hyun-soo was surprised about. He could have said hello to him since they hadn't seen each other for a long time. But Hyun-soo only got more scared. Leaning close to Hyun-soo, Jun-seong asked who had called him, and Hyun-soo said it was Hunter Kim Han-sun. After punching him in the stomach, Jun-seong grinned and asked him to try harder than last time. Hyun-soo's mouth sputtered, and he bent down from the blow. Demon showed up and called Jun-seong an unfair boy. Hyun-soo replied that the creep always makes trouble for everyone and blames it on others. Suddenly, Demon slapped Hyun-soo. He shouted, asking what the old man was fighting for and why. However, Demon just threw a shameful slap at him. The operation started, and the hunters and supporters entered the portal. It was not pleasant. Wrapping his arms around himself, Hyun-soo shouted that he would never get used to this, even if he had gone through the portal 1,000 times. He was followed faithfully by the demon. Coming out on the other side of the portal, Hyun-soo saw that the ground had dried up and wondered what kind of world it was. Hunter Kim gave the girls a task to the girls' support to analyze, and they would find out what world they were in. The girl put on her headphones and opened her laptop. The demon hovering nearby told Hyun-soo to scout the area himself, but the young man replied that they couldn't do that without orders. Demon said that since he couldn't move a step away, he was just a servant porter. Hyun-soo didn't even have anything to say because he was right. Looking around, the demon said that the surface was deserted, but he could feel the movement of underground water. Looking at him, Hyun-soo thought he was like an oracle. The girl took off her headphones and told Kim that the essence of this world was water. The hunter didn't understand it, but she said the device said so. Hyun-soo was dumbfounded by this. Standing over the girl, Kim suggested that she had made a mistake in the settings and screwed up his measurements. However, she replied that she was sure the result was correct. Nearby, Jun-sung said such a result was impossible, as suddenly a fountain splashed onto the surface from under his feet. The next instant, water began to rush to the surface from all the cracks. With the appearance of water, monsters also came to the surface. They looked like reptiles with sharp fangs and held tridents. The supports started screaming, not realizing how the mermaids had spotted them. The hunters ordered them not to panic and informed them that the newcomers should stay behind the hunters. But the mermaids didn't hesitate and started attacking them, injuring the people. Hyun-soo thought it was impossible. Holding his head and clenching his teeth, Hyun-soo thought the portal entrance was usually a safe zone, and now even B-class hunters could barely cope. The experienced supporter with the mustache shouted to Hyun-soo to carry the spear. The young man stammered and answered, going through the things in his bag. Before he could take out his spear, he was attacked by one of the mermaids. Hyun-soo let go of the spear and flew to the ground. When Hyun-soo raised himself up, he noticed the wound on his stomach and thought that the mermaid's harpoon had pierced through the armor just like a rag. Before he could recover, another mermaid approached him, holding a weapon unknown to the young man. Hyun-soo looked at him in horror. When the mermaid attacked him, something squeezed the mermaid's head, causing it to split into pieces. The demon said his punch was 10 times stronger than the Shaolin monks. Standing on the rock under which Hyun-soo demon was sitting, he pointed his finger downward and said it looked like he could fight monsters. The demon thought he had lived to fight with some fish people, and then added that the boy should look at the master in battle. The mermaids tried to attack the heavenly demon, but it easily dodged their blows. Grabbing one of the mermaids, Demon said he was 1,000 years too young. And then the demon struck and finished the sentence by saying he was too small to inflict at least a scratch on him. Another mermaid pounced, and Demon asked if he wanted revenge against his brother. The fact that they were a parody of the human form was just disgusting. A flash of chaos destroys all opponents 45 meters in direction. A beam raced around the supports and hunters like a train. When the spell subsided, a large ditch remained on the surface. Looking around, Jun-sun asked who was doing it. The girl behind him assumed it was Park Hyun-soo. But Jun-sun knew that was impossible since he was a support person. A vast, snarling reptile climbed out of the cliff. The demon stood before it, asking the reptile if he was the fish prince. Clenching his hand into a fist, the heavenly demon said that he was honored to die at the hands of a master. However, the demon easily dodged his hand. The demon didn't understand what had happened and realized his energy was gone. Russell tried to grab the old man, but his paw went through, and the demon realized that his chi energy was gone, and he could no longer damage the monsters. Growling, the mermaid stood on the rock under which Hyun-soo had been sitting all this time. Upon noticing him, the mermaid attacked Hyun-soo and he flew into a nearby rock. Sitting on the ground, Hyun-soo realized he couldn't take it anymore. The demon approached him and said that if he didn't get up now, he would die. Noticing that the mermaid was about to attack again, Demon shouted for Hyun-soo to get up. Holding the guy by the scruff of the neck, Demon told him to take a good look at the thing. Though she looked strong, she had thin bones sticking out. They were the weak point. A particularly weak spot is the collarbone. Demon kicked his foot into Hyun-soo's back, ordering him to break it. Seeing the mermaid's angry face, Hyun-soo raised his hands and said that he wasn't going to do anything to him, but he was just pushed by his grandfather. Behind, Demon shouted that you must use your elbows and break your collarbone in close combat. Backing up, Hyun-soo shouted that Grandpa was crazy and he couldn't do it. But the demon didn't stay and told the guy to look at the enemy. Clenching his fist and looking at the mermaid, Hyun-soo said he had gotten him and didn't care anymore. When the mermaid raised its head, Hyun-soo swung his clenched fists and struck the monster's collarbone with his elbow. And the mermaid fell at the young man's feet. Looking down, Hyun-soo couldn't believe he had just knocked out a mermaid with his hands. A voice asked him why he was standing there, and Hyun-soo turned around questioningly. Pointing at the spear lying there, Demon said for Hyun-soo to finish off the mermaid. Taking the spear and sweating from fear, Hyun-soo thought about how he would finish it off. He used to kill a lot of small creatures like slugs. The demon watching him said that the mermaid would kill him if Hyun-soo let him get up. Then why is he hesitating? When Demon said to finish it and help his companions, Hyun-soo turned around and saw many more mermaids attacking the hunters and supporters. He remembered that they were having a battle now. One day, he was driving down the road with his family and one of the monsters emerged from the ground. The car, along with his family, overturned and fell off the bridge into a cliff. His mother and father died that day, and his brother Hyun-dae was hospitalized. Realizing that it was all because of monsters like the one under his feet, Hyun-soo raised his spear. With both hands, he thrust his spear into the monster. A blue light enveloped him, and an unfamiliar voice told him he had expanded his boundaries by overcoming difficulties. Looking around him, Hyun-soo wondered if this was an awakening and if he had finally become an awakened person. A gallogram with tables appeared before his face, and Hyun-soo realized it was his statistics. The voice said he had now discovered a unique ability to follow clues. Hyun-soo couldn't believe his eyes. Grasping his head, Hyun-soo didn't understand how he could have awakened such a useless ability. Kim squatted down to catch his breath when the hunters dealt with all the monsters. Turning to him, Yeon said that their formation was broken and they were close to defeat. She didn't understand how such monsters could appear in a Class B portal. Screaming, Jun-sung told everyone to retreat because the recon had failed them, and the portal was a class above. Holding onto her sword, Yeon shouted for everyone to retreat before the new monsters came up. All the surviving supporters were wounded. Marin also ordered anyone still on their feet to help the wounded. Some carried the wounded on their backs, and some brought them to their senses. One of the supports was pointing his spear at the mermaid, shouting that he hated fucking fish people. It was the first time Hyun-soo had been in such a dangerous situation. Looking at the heavenly demon, Hyun-soo thought that he wouldn't have survived if it wasn't for the old man. Kim Han-sung approached the young man and said they would have to talk to him when they got back. Standing in awe at these words, Hyun-soo wondered what he had done wrong and whether Kim wanted to punish him. Returning through the porta-potties and carrying the injured Hyun-soo, he thought that he had done nothing to deserve a reprimand. An ambulance arrived. Kim said the dead would be honored posthumously by the association. He called a moment of silence in honor of the fallen comrades. Holding his head, Jun-sung thought about how annoying this was, and now the association would surely blame them as their senior officers. Suddenly, Jun-sung heard Kim say that despite their pain and loss, they had gained one awakened today. Pointing with his palm at Hyun-soo, standing in the crowd, Kim asked for applause. The young man wondered how they knew. A bus pulled up, and people in suits came out asking people to pack everything up as it was because it was association property. While Hyun-soo was quietly packing the boxes, Jun-sung approached him, put his hand on his shoulder, leaned over and asked him if he was already excited. Clenching his teeth, Jun-sung said that the world had definitely gone crazy. Looking at him, Hyun-soo didn't know what he was up to again. Slapping the guy on the cheek, Jun-sung said, "What is it?" Someone who had recovered and someone who had recently been awakened. With a smile, Jun-sung asked Hyun-soo what kind of ability Hyun-soo had discovered. But Hyun-soo looked away, not wanting to talk. One of the sappers told his friend that Choi Jun-sung was pestering the sappers again. Still, he was also curious about what ability Hyun-soo had awakened. Looking at the hunter, Hyun-soo wondered if he should tell him. Then he mumbled that it was following the clues. He imagined everyone who heard it laughed at his new, unique ability to follow cues. Shaking his head from side to side, Hyun-soo decided he didn't want to become a laughingstock. Demon leaned over to him and asked if he had correctly realized that Hyun-soo was embarrassed by his ability, but the guy told him to shut up. Hearing this, Jun-sung asked who he was talking to and assumed that his roof had started leaking since he had woken up. Swinging Jun Song said that he would look at his ability now. Suddenly, Hyun-soo saw a galagram before him, saying the following cues were activated. Behind his back, Demon told him to take a step back, and when Jun Seong tried to hit him, he missed. Because of the force of the miss, Jun Sung almost fell and was shocked by this development. Hyun-soo saw the galagram and said that the ability had been used. His attack power was now increased by 15%. Because Jun Song failed, he became even more angry and clenched his fist. He called him ugly and asked Hyun-soo what he wanted one-on-one. Once again, Demon appeared behind Hyun-soo's back and said he needed to do a tiger crouch to the left and a lightning strike to the right. Everything was enveloped in a blue light, and Hyun-soo asked what was wrong. He felt like time had stopped. And then he realized that the new technique was being written directly into his memory. Now Hyun-soo easily did what the demon told him to do. The impact made Jungseon roll backward. The people watching were thrilled that Hyun-soo had knocked down a Class B hunter with one punch. Everyone came over to see Jun Seong lying there, not believing that such a thing was possible because he had awakened only a couple of hours ago. Kim came over to him, took his pulse, and said it was normal, but Yaren should call the paramedics. Looking at his hand, Hyun-soo thought unbelievably that he had knocked out Jun-sun. As he approached, Kim called out Hyun-soo's full name, saying that using force against a colleague is strictly forbidden and could result in criminal liability. Smiling, Kim whispered in Hyun-soo's ear that he would pretend nothing had happened for the first time. As he left, Kim turned around and put 2 fingers to his head. He said he would put in a good word for Hyun-soo at the association and needed to come in for a class assignment. Looking at the hunter's back and the cheering crowd, Hyun-soo realized everyone was thrilled that he had defeated Jun Sung. Marin also approached him, reached out her hand to shake his, and said she hoped they would work. Hyun-soo was shocked. His heart pounded harder as Jaren Z herself spoke to him. The demon asked if he liked the maiden. Embarrassed, he started waving his arms around, saying that the demon was talking nonsense. Ei noticed this and looked at him questioningly. Hyun-soo's mouth pouted, and Demon told him to speak up because he had to get every word out of him. Yi Hyun-soo fell to his knees with his arms crossed in a lock, begging Demon to take him on as a disciple. He wanted Demon to teach him martial arts. The Demon stood with his hands folded behind his back and looked at him sternly. Demon turned his head away and said importantly that he didn't want to be Hyun-soo's teacher. The young man shrieked, but Demon said he wouldn't take anyone as a student. Looking down at the guy, Demon asked how he would have time to practice martial arts if he took Hyun-soo to babysit. When Demon turned away, Hyun-soo asked him what the point of practicing martial arts was if he was incorporeal. Demon didn't like that. Angry, Hyun-soo reminded him that Demon had said he was bored out of his mind. Demon's bushy eyebrows drew together with anger. Continuing to fuel the fire, Hyun-soo said the demon would return to where it came from if it died. Heavenly Demon clenched his teeth. Demon sighed and thought Hyun-soo's words might have a grain of truth. Hyun-soo continued, reminding him that Demon himself had seen how helpless he was in the portal. If Demon hadn't helped him, he wouldn't have been able to do anything. The demon finally said that if he trained Hyun-soo, he would become a hunter. The guy corrected that it was a hunter. Demon asked if it would give Hyun-soo freedom of movement. The guy asked about the portals, but Demon replied that they were everywhere in all worlds. After thinking about it, Hyun-soo said he could go anywhere he wanted if he earned an A. And if he earned the S grade, he'd be untouchable. Demon asked who the untouchable was, and Hyun-soo explained that it was someone no one dares to challenge. The demon said he was untouchable. The demon bent down and said that Hyun-soo had to go through the ritual of 9 bows. The young man looked at him and asked what the 9-something ritual was. Calling the guy a jerk, the demon said that Hyun-soo should bow 9 times since he would be his teacher. Hyun-soo realized that and was happy. But then he looked around and said there were so many people there. However, Demon said that it was either now or never. He sat down on his knees and began to bow. The people standing nearby looked at him and did not understand what was happening to him. Also watching, Jaren said she thought Hyun-soo wasn't doing well, but Kim replied that he would step back. When they got home, Demon yelled for Hyun-soo to get out, or he'd serve his teacher in a pigsty. Hyun-soo looked at him and asked if he could leave tomorrow, but Demon asked how many slaps he needed to give him to get him to move. While Hyun-soo was wiping the floor, Demon asked why he had glued the paper on the wall. Hyun-soo didn't understand the question and looked at his art. When Hyun-soo peeled off the paper, he said that this was the portal from which the demon had come. He was scaring him, so Hyun-soo taped it up. As he approached the portal, Demon thought for a while and stepped into it. Hyun-soo asked where he was going. But instead of answering, Demon stuck his hand out of the portal, grabbed Hyun-soo by his sweater and said he would go with him. They found themselves in an empty space when they went through the portal. Looking around, Demon said it was a strange place, and he could only feel emptiness. Hyun-soo fell out of the portal right on his knees. Then Demon said that this was the perfect place for Hyun-soo to experience the trials of life. Hearing those words, Hyun-soo stammered and asked his teacher again. After sitting in the lotus position, Demon told Hyun-soo to take off his shirt and sit down. But Hyun-soo asked why, and then Demon told him not to contradict his teacher. Hyun-soo took off his sweatshirt and sat beside him in the lotus position. He was embarrassed because he had nothing under his sweatshirt and now had to sit with his bare torso. With his hand, Demon touched his back, and Hyun-soo asked what Demon was doing, and he told him to make the student straighten his back. A blue haze appeared, and Demon said that he would adjust his energy nodes because they needed to be cleansed before using martial arts. Hyun-soo's lip tightened as he listened to Demon say that he wouldn't be able to study if it was too much for him. It became tough at some point, and Hyun-soo turned red and clenched his teeth. His eyes burned with blue fire. Clapping his hands on his back, Demon said that he had a stable body. After finishing the ritual, Demon stood up and said he had not seen such a healthy body for a long time. When Hyun-soo sat down again, Demon asked him if he was okay, but Hyun-soo said that he was not dead and that he would definitely die. Watching Hyun-soo wipe his drool, Demon thought his body was perfect for martial arts, but he lives in a time when the arts are neglected. Back at the apartment, Hyun-soo exclaimed that he felt light and tired. While Hyun-soo was swinging his fists, happy that he was at ease, Daeomon explained that it was because he had cleared his chakras. Thinking that he was so light that it looked like he could fly up, Hyun-soo pushed himself off the floor and surprisingly did fly up. When Demon turned around, he saw Hyun-soo's head smash through the ceiling. In fact, the demon wanted to say that he shared a bit of his chi energy, in other words, a bit of the heavenly demon's bejeweled prowess. Finally, after getting out of the hole in the ceiling, Hyun-soo fell to the floor and asked how Demon had done it. The demon laughed and said that it was dangerous, and he wondered how Hyun-soo had survived. Hyun-soo blushed and shouted at the news. Getting up from the floor, Hyun-soo leaned over to Demon and shouted that he was crazy enough to almost kill him. The demon shouted that he dared not raise his voice at his teacher. Hyun-soo rolled backward in a ball. Hyun-soo got up from the floor again, shook himself off, and asked what Demon would do if he died. But Demon turned away and said that he wasn't dead. If Hyun-soo couldn't withstand even a bit of divine energy, he wouldn't be able to start training. And the technique that Demon shared yesterday, it was the only technique available to mortals. However, with it alone, Hyun-soo could not become a demon disciple. A new day came, and Hyun-soo went to the office to take an awakening class. When Hyun-soo approached the front desk, he saw a nice girl who asked what she could do for him. He replied that Hunter Kim had to sign him in. The girl clapped her hands and shouted enthusiastically. Hyun-soo was confused by this reaction. The girl took out her phone and asked if she could take selfies with him, but before Hyun-soo could agree, she had already taken a picture of them. After finishing the photo, the girl explained that Hyun-soo needed to go to the 5th underground floor of the appraisal department, where he needed the chief appraiser, Nok-soo. As Hyun-soo entered the elevator, he shook his head, wondering what would happen. The demon told him not to chicken out because he had to get the rank. After exiting the elevator, Hyun-soo saw the training room and thought about those sounds. Noticing the scoreboard with the number 687, Hyun-soo opened his mouth and heard someone say a great shot. The girl was striking, and the guy behind her was supporting her. When she finished, he ran to her and shouted a number off the scoreboard, exclaiming that it was unbelievable. Kneading her hands, the girl said she could stuff more and would try again. However, there was a man behind the glass who said that she was Class B for now and no more. For Class A, you need more than 900 units, and she wasn't ready yet. It was the head appraiser, Jung Nok-soo. He looked out the door and asked the young man if he was Park Hyun-soo. With his hands folded, Nok-soo said Hyun-soo was early, but Hak-sung warned him. Scratching the back of his head, Hyun-soo laughed. Nok-soo walked into the hall and told Chan Hun-soo that Hyun-soo was there. The guy in the cap looked around. Then he extended his hand for a handshake, saying he couldn't believe it and was honored to see Hyun-soo. Nok-soo folded his arms and said that Hyun-soo probably doesn't know, but the rumors of his exploits had already spread, and Chang-hoon laughed. Remembering the girl at the front desk, Hyun-soo finally realized what was wrong. The girl who was testing interrupted the conversation and asked if they would continue. Chang-hoon looked around and said yes with a gasp. Yi Nok-soo said he would evaluate Hyun-soo, and Kim should continue testing with Han Ul-si. Passing by Han Ul-shu, Hyun-soo glanced over to her and sighed. A demon leaned over Hyun-soo and asked him what his unhealthy fear of women was, but Hyun-soo said he had no fear. However, Han Ul-soo noticed that the guy was acting strange, and when she and Jang-hoon went out into the hallway, she asked if Hyun-soo had awakened. When she heard the answer, Han Ul-soo started waving her fists around, saying that maybe Hyun-soo was her future colleague and they would meet in battle. After putting on his tracksuit, Hyun-soo scratched the back of his head because his appearance seemed funny. The demon slicked, calling his outfit necessary because he thought clothes should hide his loins. Otherwise, why would they be required? Hyun-soo covered his privates. As he walked away through the wall, Demon said that if Hyun-soo were to walk around in his mother's clothes, it would be more decent than this suit. Hyun-soo covered his ears. Standing before the door where his evaluation would begin, Hyun-soo heard Nok-soo ask if he was ready, and Hyun-soo said yes. A red lantern lit above the scoreboard, and Hyun-soo was told to feel his dantian, the center of chi energy in a person's body. The demon hovered nearby and said that the power Hyun-soo had put into his new technique yesterday came from there. He needs to learn how to draw from it. A kilogram appeared, saying that following the prompts had been activated and successfully using the ability would increase the attack power. At this time, Hyun-soo felt an incredible power in his hand. The power was so mighty that a bright blue light illuminated the room. There was an explosion, and Nok-soo looked out of his cubbyhole, his mouth hanging open at what he saw. The force meter went off the scale, and the number 1,120 appeared on the scoreboard. A red light flashed above it. Holding up his fist, Hyun-soo also opened his mouth, not believing that he could knock out such a score since Han Ul-soo had only knocked out 700. Thinking about it, Hyun-soo realized he had used a lightning strike like yesterday, but the power was incomparable. That was what energy control gave him. Nok-soo ran up to him exclaiming that it was unbelievable and that Hyun-soo was a Class A warrior. Above 1,500, only the S-class. And Hyun-soo asked if he could do it again. Nok-soo said he could, but then he noticed that Hyun-soo had broken their shield. While Hyun-soo was warming up, Nok-soo called someone and said they could do nothing. Then Hyun-soo said he'd try it next time, and they could move on to the next test. The next test evaluated the kicks. The scoreboard showed the number 1,377. While writing down the results, Nok-soo said he was sorry that Hyun-soo had fallen slightly short of the S-class. Hyun-soo scratched the back of his head and laughed in response. But Demon was furious and called the student a lousy student because if he had concentrated faster, he would have already beaten out 1,500,000. Hyun-soo groaned. Next was the treadmill test. Hyun-soo was wearing various gauges, and Nok-soo measured the results with a stopwatch. After a few more tests, Nok-soo exclaimed that Hyun-soo had a stable A grade, and even though they weren't finished yet, he was sure he would get it. Leaning to Hyun-soo, Nok-soo whispered that he would undergo the most critical battle simulation test after lunch. Nok-soo also said that if Hyun-soo didn't want to go today, they would sign him up for another day, but the guy said he would go today. During the break, Hyun-soo went to the cafeteria for refreshments. He took the ramyun because he hadn't eaten it for a long time. After all, the price on the market skyrocketed after the factories were destroyed, and Hyun-soo couldn't even look in his direction. Watching the disciple devour the soup, Demon asked if it was good, and Hyun-soo said it was the best food in the world. When Hyun-soo sucked in the noodles, the demon's saliva flowed, and he thought that they had all sorts of noodles too. Hearing that Demon called noodles the best food in the world, Hyun-soo took it with his chopsticks and shoved it in Demon's face, telling him not to be shy and help himself. The Demon exclaimed indignantly that he was teasing him even though he knew he couldn't eat food, and Hyun-soo replied that it was for making caustic comments all day long. After lunch, Hyun-soo went to the battle simulation room. He saw Han Ul-soo coming out. She was all shredded and holding her side. Biting her lip, Han Ul-soo gave an exasperated groan. Chang-hoon ran out of the office after her, asking if she was okay. He put his arm around her and helped her leave, saying she did a great job. Hyun-soo's eyes widened as she looked and listened to Jang-hoon tell Han Ul-soo to go to the office where the class certificate would be issued. When Hyun-soo entered the office, he saw Nok-soo smiling. He said that a genius engineer and hunter had created the battle simulation room. Looking around the office, Hyun-soo said the battle simulation gave the most realistic feeling of fighting with mantras. The damage done in the simulation also has realistic consequences. Hyun-soo was wearing a mask and bracelets. There are 10 levels in total, and since Hyun-soo has a Class A, he starts from the 4th level. The simulation started, and Hyun-soo found himself in another world, among the greenery. Above him, the sun was shining brightly. and beside him was a demon watching from the apprentice's side. Birds flew in the sky, and monkeys hung from trees. Hyun-soo wondered if it was really a simulation. The demon beside him hummed and said that whoever had created this machine was obviously versed in the magic of mystical dimensions. Turning to the teacher, Hyun-soo asked what mystical dimension magic was. Demon explained that it was used to deceive the enemy or conceal. Before they could take a couple steps, the first monster jumped out of the bushes. Immediately, Demon used a spell to repel the monster's attack. He remembered running out of power that day and couldn't fight the monsters. When Demon looked back, he saw Hyun-soo standing beside the monster, only in pieces. The disciple's hand was covered in blood. Laughing, Hyun-soo started pointing his finger at himself and asked what Demon thought of his abilities now. Suddenly, 3 more monsters jumped out at Hyun-soo from the other side. Looking back at Demon Hyun-soo, he heard the teacher say a lazy donkey somersault. But the guy didn't understand what he meant and asked again. However, the demon just shouted for the lad to comply, and Hyun-soo fell to the ground. The monsters flew past him. Noticing that their prey had slipped away, the monsters slowed down and turned around, growling. Suddenly, a huge foot appeared and crushed the monsters. Hyun-soo looked up and saw a giant ogre. But the ogre also noticed Hyun-soo and swung his fist. Hyun-soo shouted. The ogre's fist came down exactly where the boy was, but Hyun-soo was already running away. But the ogre didn't stop there. On the contrary, it only became more furious. It began to smash the trees around it, trying to attack its target. Trying to escape the monster, Hyun-soo shouted that the ogre was too giant and asked Demon what he should do. As he flew into the air, Demon said that the disciple had a good opportunity to realize what he was capable of so Hyun-soo could think of something. Thinking he wouldn't be given a class if he ran away, Hyun-soo accelerated and shouted for the ogre to taste a Class A kick. With all his might, Hyun-soo struck under the ogre's knee while continuing to shout that it was a killing of 1,377 points. Even though he succeeded, it only made the monster more angry. After the blow, the ogre instantly regained consciousness and wrapped his arms around Hyun-soo with both hands. While the ogre was squeezing him, Hyun-soo clenched his teeth in pain and thought that if he lost consciousness, it would all be over. He had to pull himself together. The observing demon told the student to calm his breathing and spread his internal energy throughout his body. Concentrating, Hyun-soo felt the heavenly demon's energy within him. When the energy was sufficient, Hyun-soo was able to unclench his vice. The ogre's palm shattered into pieces. Hyun-soo continued to float in the air. Hyun-soo jumped on the ogre's head and kicked him with his knee. The head also shattered into splinters, but Hyun-soo kept punching. Level 4 has been completed. Nok-soo said that if Hyun-soo is ready, Level 5 will be ready soon. Looking at the disciple, Nok-soo thought he had never seen anyone break through the physical suppression system before. Lee Mi-na, a Class A hunter and member of the association, entered the office. She said Hyun-soo was strong, and Nok-soo said he had great potential. Looking at her, Nok-soo said that she was quickly sent to them. Apparently, rumors of her talents reached the association quickly. Folding her hands, Lee Mi-na said she couldn't let such a rare A-class fighter be removed from under their guild's nose. The next world was cold, and Hyun-soo hugged himself and complained about the cold. The demon thought it was amazing that a magician could create the illusion of weather. After all, even among sorcerers who possess the technique of mystical measurements, few are capable of such a thing. A barefooted girl ran towards them. She was running barefoot in the snow, wrapped in a cloak, and held out her hand to ask for help. She fell right on top of Hyun-soo. He asked what happened to her. When he could pull it back, he saw its face change to ugly. That was the monster of this level. After throwing off her robe, she flew up and started strangling Hyun-soo. She had claws on her feet and wings on her back, and half of her body was covered in feathers. Looking at the monster, Hyun-soo clenched his teeth and thought about what seemed to be a level 5 vampire battle simulation. Watching the simulation, Lee Mi-na said that Hyun-soo has a rare talent and is very different from all the awakened people she has met. The impractical fighting stance is reminiscent of ancient martial arts movies. Amazingly, it was effective. While Hyun-soo was fighting the vampire girl, another vampire appeared. He laughed and said that Hyun-soo was a worthy opponent. After finishing with her, Hyun-soo proceeded to this vampire and easily ripped his heart out of his chest. The heavenly demon smiled and said that Hyun-soo was not bad. The 5th level was passed. Nok-soo exclaimed that Hyun-soo was amazing. And Nok-soo asked if the boy would be willing to go to the 6th level. Before that, he would have 3 to 10 minutes to take a break. The sun was already setting when Hyun-soo came out of the simulation room. He was sweating and breathing heavily. Seeing Nuksu, Hyunsu said he thought he could do better, but the evaluator clapped his hands and said he was the first person in Class A to pass the level. The appraiser told Hyunsu to go to the office and get the documents. They bowed to each other, and Hyunsu thanked him for his work. When Hyunsu entered the elevator, a smiling Lee Mina followed him. When Lee Mina extended her hand, she introduced herself and said it was nice to meet you. Hyunsu stood silently with his mouth open. The demon laughed as he held out his hand and asked how he was feeling, saying that since Hyunsu was his student, girls would always be around him. They sat down on the sofas in the office, and Lee Mina handed him a folder of papers, claiming it was a contract from the association. After giving him time to familiarize himself, Lee Mina said that any hunter would be attracted to conditions like theirs. Hyunsu was wondering if he too would finally become a hunter. The contract stipulated a stable salary and a bonus for expeditions to portals. He remembered that when he went to the support, he had to pay the deposit himself to get the position. Extending her hand, Lee Mina said that she should have noticed that the contract was tailor-made for Hyunsu. Next to her sat Demon, who said that Lee Mina is very beautiful, and even their women are not as beautiful as her. Looking at the student, Demon asked what Hyunsu would do if such a beauty offered to sign an important document. Watching Hyunsu's emotions, Lee Mina drank the juice and thought that, with his face, he didn't like the conditions. But Demon said to think with his head, and Hyunsu is setting his terms now because he deserves more. Looking into the contract, Demon asked how long Hyunsu was offered to serve this association and was horrified by the figure of 10 years. After a few minutes of silence, Hyunsu said he would prefer a 5-year contract. The health and life risk bonus is also low, considering he needs to raid S-Class portals. Listening to him, Lee Mina thought that he was a rookie, and given the conditions he put up, he was a rookie that the association really needed. A girl burst into the office with her foot, outraged that the association doesn't put hired hunters in anything and always writes such Kabbalistic contracts. Both Lee Mina and Hyunsu were surprised to see the girl. Hyunsu looked at her and asked if she was a Red Lion. Leaning towards him, the girl said she was Hajurak from the Red Lion Guild. Shaking Hyunsu Hajurak's hand, said it was nice to meet her and asked if she would interrupt them, and the guy said no. The demon laughed and said that this woman was also beautiful. Hyunsu looked back at him and wondered why Demon was acting like this. Taking off his cap and plopping down on the couch next to Lee Minoi Hajurak, he said that the Red Lion Guild would offer him more than the association. Seeing Hajurak drinking her juice, Lee Mina shouted that this is an association building and asked who let her in, but Hajurak replied that she was registered. Turning to the disciple, Demon said that this woman was strong and he had yet to meet such strong ones in Hyunsu's world. She was an S-Class hunter. Waving her finger, Hajurak said that the guild had many more opportunities than this corporation of crooks. Lee Mina clenched her fists indignantly. Lee Mina said that they have a monopoly on portal raids, but Hajurak replied that the information is gone, and their guild has the same rights. She added that while they waited for the committee's official decision, Lee Mina said she would check it out. However, Hajurak definitely sat down with her arms folded and crossed. While the girls were having a heated argument, Hyunsu thought, and stood up, coughing to get their attention. The girls looked back at him. With his hand on his heart, Hyunsu said that he had made a decision. The girls looked at him questioningly, waiting for an answer. A portal had been opened in the Ilka Mountains. Supports and hunters already in diving gear were fighting the mermaids. Everyone realized they were in trouble because it wasn't in the survey. They were told they would have to walk on wet ground, but there was a deep sea. There were far more mermaids than humans, and the portal was not Class B. They'll be wiped out if the hunters don't think of something. One of them decided to call the squad leader for help. The foreman of the squad was a hunter of Daeho. He saw a red flash. Kim gave the signal to retreat with his hand. He said he would hold off the monsters and that everyone else should retreat to dry land. The petty officer had the unique ability of the shadow clone technique, one of the most difficult S-Class techniques. This technique lasted up to 10 minutes. That day, thanks to the petty officer, they survived. One of the clones said that when they got out, all the participants would owe him a beer for the real body. Taking off the mask, one of the operation's participants looked around the ground and asked where the petty officer's real body was. The petty officer waded out onto dry land, but suddenly, a water fountain appeared behind him. A giant monster came out of there. It ate half the petty officer's body. His colleague, who was watching the whole thing, cried out with horror in his eyes. It was night. In the association office, Lee Mina was still sitting with her head down, and Hajurak was still saying that Hyunsu had screwed them over. When Hyunsu stood up, he said he wouldn't rush and would wait for other guilds to offer more favorable terms. After bowing to the girls, Hyunsu said they knew his number so they could call him back. Thinking back on it all, Ha Yurak resented the way Hyunsu and Lee Mina sat there as if offended by him. Pondering, Ha Yurak thought the Red Lions and the association had offered him terms. Now she doubted that the other guilds would approach him. Literally on fire from the emotions that overwhelmed her, Ha Yurak flew out of the office with a bullet. Watching this, Lee Mina gasped, thought Ha Yurak hadn't changed and was still just as fiery. The next day, Hyunsu's new transcendent skill, Heavenly Demon Superiority Gate, was revealed. The young man didn't like the name of the skill very much. Sitting on his knees before Demon, Hyunsu listened as he said that a disciple's grades would be earned for defeating a strong monster or an artifact. However, Hyunsu was surprised that more than 5 classes are known to people. Looking at the disciple, Demon said that the stance of proper movement is the foundation of martial arts. By learning these basics, Hyunsu will be able to learn techniques. The demon told Hyunsu to watch and memorize. Still, given the student's ability, he was sure that the guy would understand everything the first time. Extending his arm and leg out to the side, Demon said this was the first set of 5 gate movements. A gallogram appeared, saying that Hyunsu had mastered the first complex of the Heavenly Demon phenomenon. The demon showed that its movements should be light and smooth. Hyunsu's mouth dropped open because it seemed as if the demon was moving and not moving. The demon showed a couple more moves, saying that this is the phenomenon, and the rest are according to the situation. Opening his eyes wide, Hyunsu didn't understand how he could repeat it. The gallograph reported that his cognitive ability had dropped to 38. But Demon reassured him that even with his abilities, Hyunsu couldn't comprehend the skill at once, so let him just concentrate. The second set of movements was the Heavenly Demon's flight. After getting off the ground, the Heavenly Demon showed different movements, and Hyunsu opened his mouth again. Turning to his disciple, Demon said that he would ride the air like a dragon, and in a moment, be at the enemy's back. Watching his teacher's movements, Hyunsu realized how fast he was, and that this speed was not comparable to when he dragged him through the air. Hyunsu's cognitive ability decreased again because he didn't internalize the information, and his comprehension level dropped by 31%. Clenching his fists, the demon said that if Hyunsu mastered the appearance and flight of the Heavenly Demon, he could learn the first 6 techniques of his cult's crushing blows. Gallogram reported that Hyunsu had received information about the transcendent class skill, crushing blows from the heavens. Looking at the student's face, Demon told Hyunsu to stop making faces and look carefully because the third complex was even more complicated. When Hyunsu saw the technique, his cognitive ability decreased again, and his comprehension level dropped to 0. Looking back, Hyunsu realized that the demon had just disappeared and he could not see him at all. The demon suddenly appeared behind his back, saying that this was the exit of the demon's soul. It was a special set of movements to get behind the enemy's back. Hyunsu couldn't stand it any longer. Sweat was pouring down his face. Folding his hands behind his back, the demon said the fourth complex was the Heavenly Demon Soul Vortex. By performing this technique, Hyunsu's light shone, and he covered his face with his hands. The name was the whole point. You must spin fast enough to create an invisible vortex that consumes the enemy's soul. It's the demon's favorite move. Tensing up, Hyunsu considered the fact that he didn't see anything at this speed, and wondered how he could repeat it if he didn't understand anything. The demon said that if Hyunsu mastered the vortex and soul exit, he could access the next set of techniques of crushing blows from the heavens. There were 12 techniques in total, but Demon said that the minimum requirement for the last one was to know the 5th complex of gate superiority. Hyunsu's eyes opened wide at the realization that if he mastered the superior gate, it would not guarantee that he would master the latter technique. The 5th complex was the Heavenly Demon Sovereign's Descent. Upon seeing the technique, Hyunsu shouted. As he flew into the air, Hyunsu thought that the demon had stomped only once, but the ground beneath his feet and the world turned upside down. After the flight, Hyunsu fell to the ground with a thud, and Demon said that you must rise up so that the whole world will bow down before you. After hearing him, Hyunsu just groaned as he continued lying face down on the ground. The next day, a meeting was held at the association office, during which a man broadcast that only 4 Class B hunters and 5 Sappas had survived. He also reported that Petty Officer Dae-ho had been killed, and that this was the association's 3rd raid into the Ilcha Mountains, and again, a defeat. Those gathered began to resent that the intelligence was not giving them correct information or how to explain it. Everyone quarreled that the intelligence department was doing the wrong thing. However, intelligence said it had never misclassified portals. Someone entered the office shouting "Gentlemen," and all the men abruptly fell silent, rising from their seats. Touching the table with her fingertips, Lee Mina said that they could at least fight with each other, but it wouldn't solve the problem. She placed her hand on Lee Mina's chest and said she had a solution. Hyun-soo woke up abruptly, and Demon said he was a disgrace. The boy looked at the teacher and asked how he had gotten there. Frowning his eyebrows, Demon said that Hyun-soo slipped during practice, and that's how he ended up here. Lowering his head, Hyun-soo remembered that he was trying to learn the Heavenly Demon's Gate. But Demon said that the Gate of Superiority was a skill that allowed him to move through the air, and if he showed it in full force, Hyun-soo would die. Clutching the blanket, Hyun-soo thought he would never want to go through something like this. And Demon recalled what he had already said. Hyun-soo was not ready, or they would need a chi charge of at least 120 years. The Demon advised Hyun-soo to focus on increasing his energy potential, so he started with the Heavenly Demon apparition and flight techniques. At night, while in the empty office of the building, Lee Mina sat in front of the computer and pondered. She recalled one of the men asking what her solution was. But everyone started indignant when she said the association should consider cooperating with other associations. She said that she thought they needed to cooperate with the Red Lion Guild, and was asked if this was a joke. One of the men even said that if that's her way of working, she should quit. Leaning over the table and closing her eyes, Lee Mina wondered if they even knew what it was like to conduct a portal raid. The next day, while walking through the city, Hyun-soo saw a notification on his phone that his paycheck had dropped and got excited. He decided that the first thing he'd do was to pay Hyungdae's hospital bills. After paying, he hit the wall of the nearest building because he had almost nothing left. Leaning his head against the wall, Hyun-soo smiled and thought, what if he signed the contract? After looking at the notifications on his phone, Hyun-soo marveled that all the guilds wanted to work with him, and the association and Red Lions had made him offers. Shoving the phone into his pocket, Hyun-soo told Demon that since he would have money soon anyway, he would buy ramyun. The Demon asked if the noodles were in the red broth, and Hyun-soo said the teacher should try it. The Demon called him a rascal and took a swing at him. He slapped his student so hard that Hyun-soo almost fell down. Hyun-soo rubbed the back of his head and said that he had learned something about the Demon's appearance. However, Demon grabbed his hair and told him not to get cocky, and Hyun-soo bit his lip in pain. Upon entering the store, Hyun-soo thought there was no one else, but then he looked around and said hello. He saw a girl he knew named Yoon and asked if she was okay, and she said yes, oppa. Walking over to the noodle shop, he asked Yoon if she was still working part-time on the weekends, and Yoon informed him that she was. While Hyun-soo was picking up a bunch of noodles, Yoon went through the goods in the box and said that it couldn't be helped because she has a little brother and sister and needs to try harder. Walking up to the cash register, Hyun-soo asked if he would punch the item himself, and Yoon thanked him. As he left the store, Hyun-soo said the money was near the cash register, and Yoon said goodbye to him. Suddenly, Yoon came out of the store, waving the money and shouting at Hyun-soo that he had forgotten the change. He replied that it was for her siblings so she could treat them. Smiling, Yoon rubbed her nose and thought it was cute. The Demon leaned over to Hyun-soo and shouted that he was a villain for buying a girl's heart with money, and Hyun-soo jumped with fright and then blushed. But Hyun-soo replies that it's not because Yoon, like him, lost her parents 2 years ago when the portals opened, and she's raising the kids alone. While they were walking, Hyun-soo told how Yoon sacrificed school to earn money for her family, just like him. However, Demon poked him in the back of the head with his finger, saying that it was improper for his student to sing dithyrambs to himself. Back at the apartment, Hyun-soo made his favorite ramyun. As he ate the noodles, he once again marveled at their flavor. Sitting with his back to Hyun-soo, Demon still looked at the student appetizingly eating the noodles, asking if it was really that good, and Hyun-soo replied that they make the best ramyun in the world. Suddenly, the Demon grabbed his hand holding the chopsticks. With his apprentice's hand, the Demon brought the chopsticks to his mouth and devoured the noodles. Looking at the Demon, Hyun-soo exclaimed that he had succeeded. The Demon looked down at his body. Showing the class with his hand, Demon shouted that this was truly one of the most delicious meals in the universe. Hyun-soo patted his head and said he could eat from his hands. Hyun-soo was stunned. Turning around to him, Demon cheerfully said that Hyun-soo should feed the teacher in that case. Clenching his teeth and glancing at his teacher, Hyun-soo realized he now had another inconvenience. A cheerful Yoon walked through the city with a big bag, thinking that she was lucky because the lunchboxes that kids liked had not all been taken away yet. Suddenly, the manholes along the road flew into the air and water began to gush. Yoon shrieked in fright. The water instantly flooded the street and people in the water were screaming and asking for help. In the streets of the city, mermaid monsters appeared. People who saw them were terrified, not knowing what they were. The monsters began attacking people and taking their lives with their tridents. A mermaid emerged from the water, raising her spear above her and shouting that this world of plenty was theirs and that they would drive out all who crowded it. Smiling, the mermaid said they would be the rulers of this land. A giant serpent came out of the water, approached Yoon, and opened its mouth. She clenched her teeth and looked at the monster in horror as tears rolled down from her eyes. At this time, Hyunsu and Demon went into the portal to practice. The disciple sat in the lotus posture, swirling a blue haze around him. Turning his head, the demon thought it strange that even though this dimension was deserted, he always felt a surge of energy here. When Hyunsu got up, he shouted that he felt rested and full of energy after the energy circulation, because he had been so tense. Demon explained that circulation also cleanses the streams of negative energy, and Hyunsu said that if he practiced it, he wouldn't have to go to the doctor. Looking at the student from under his bushy eyebrows, the demon told him not to talk nonsense, but to take a stand and practice phenomenon in flight. Hyunsu thought that although his cognitive abilities were not at their best during that training session, he had at least learned these techniques to some extent. He decided to try to reproduce the technique as much as he had memorized it. Watching his student repeat the technique, Demon realized that Hyunsu was gifted. He didn't think he'd be so good at it. A siren was blaring in the association building. People asked if they were mobilizing the population, and where someone shouted that it was an invasion of portal monsters in the Ilch Mountains. Watching this panic, Lee Mina thought she was right that they should unite. If they mobilize to Kangdong, then the Isaac Guild will be there. Noticing the employee, Lee Mina shouted that she needed to be in the center of the fighting and send all the fighters she could. Running down the corridor towards the exit, Lee Mina thought that the Isaac Guild couldn't do it alone. When Demon came out of the portal, he sat on the bed, smiled, and said, "My apprentice." Hyunsu was wary of why the demon was so kind. Smiling with a full mouth, the demon said that after the training, the teacher wants to have a refreshment, so let Hyunsu make that ramyun of his. Hyunsu took the pot, and Demon lay on the bed and asked him to turn on the magic lantern from which the messenger spoke. When Hyunsu turned on the news, he saw a girl on TV reporting that there was an emergency in Kangdong-gu because of an invasion of fish people and that there were dead people. Hyunsu immediately realized that they had broken out of the portal in the Ilcha Mountains and that the third raid had also failed. Demon asked if the Ilcha Mountains were where they were, and Hyunsu said yes. Suddenly, Hyunsu realized that this was the neighborhood where Yoon lived. He immediately rushed to the door. He was racing through the city and thought he should rescue her soon. Thinking about it, Hyunsu realized it would take a long time to get there by car, but if he could run in a straight line, he would be there in 20 minutes. Realizing that buildings were in his way, Hyunsu decided to use the Heavenly Demon's flight. Jumping from building to building and running on the walls of buildings, Hyunsu was closer to his goal with each step. He was followed by the demon, who evaluated the student's skills. At the battle scene, a Black Panther was wielding a Black Panther fighting a fisherman. A crowd watched him from the window, happy that Choi Hyun-woo was fighting monsters. Clutching onto the road sign, Choi Hyun-woo shouted for the hunters not to panic and to fight confidently. Standing on the roof of the car, one of the biggest hunters, holding a huge sword, answered, "Of course, the captain." The hunter shouted that he was the butcher of Banbo Gum. A giant monster pounced on him, but at the exact moment, a woman's hand appeared, and an explosion sounded. It was a hunter on a water bike. She shouted, asking why Bunbo Gum hadn't taken a motorcycle like hers while shooting monsters with her bow. Just then, explosions were heard, and the girl exclaimed that she was an archer chemist from Kangdong-gu. Banbo Gum did not live long. A water snake came at him from behind and bit off his head. When she saw this, Chemist screamed and started firing her bow, using profanity to accompany her shots. But Black Panther pounced on her to stop her, telling her to leave that thing alone because he didn't want her to get eaten either. The monster opened its mouth and roared, but Chemist had already started the bike and they rode away. The mermaid, watching from above, stood in the water fountain like a throne and, looking at the battle, decided that hunters made excellent food. The mermaid laughed, for she was amused that the more knights, the better for them. Hyunsu had already arrived and did a tiger crouch to the left. He thought it was an ordinary technique if you put energy into it. Hyunsu jumped down on the monster from the top of the building, striking it with his fist. Chemist and Black Panther saw this. The people watching the battle from the window didn't realize who had attacked the monster. It seemed unbelievable to them. Watching the monster go underwater, Panther thought he had killed it with a single blow, but that didn't happen. The chemist assumed it was Class S. But the demon watching Hyunsu knew that the monster's life energy had not been extinguished yet. The monster smashed everything around it to catch its assailant, but Hyunsu had slipped away so far. When he repeated the technique, a galograph appeared, indicating that the heavenly demon apparition had assimilated 40%. Hyunsu's legs were already falling off when Demon told him that he was a moron because it was possible to increase the strength of one's muscles many times over when one distributed energy. Screaming, Hyunsu asked why he couldn't have said it earlier, but Demon replied simply that he should have already done what he said. Limina was rushing to the scene on the other side of the city. Standing in the traffic jam, she shouted that the roads and the subway were jammed. Suddenly, Limina noticed the news. They were showing a stream of one of the viewers from the scene. It was talking about a new incredible hunter. Limina looked in horror because she recognized this new unknown hunter as Hyunsu Shi. Finally, without waiting, the girl exited the car and ran on her own 2 feet. Attacking the monster, Hyunsu applied the Heavenly Demon Flight adapted version. The technique was mastered 30%, and Hyunsu was glad he had given the monster a good kick. The crowd on the roof of the building cheered, and Hyunsu thought that if there was a test here, it would come out to at least 1,300 points. The snake's most vulnerable spot was its chin. The demon told Hyunsu to use the flying technique to get close and give her an uppercut. When Hyunsu jumped on the serpent, the mermaid raised her hands and told the Lord to send her strength. Russell shouted to the serpent that this man was dangerous and needed to be humiliated immediately. The snake roared and hit Hyunsu with its tail. The guy flew into a nearby building. Standing like that with her arms spread out, the mermaid screamed for the serpent to swallow him and take his power. The demon noticed that this sorceress was supporting the monsters with healing energy, another matter. Raising her spear, the sorceress shouted that the world would be theirs. At this point, Demon thought he had never felt such a strong desire to intervene. He thought that if he were material, he would have turned them into dust. But he had to save his student. A voice behind the sorceress and the serpent told everyone to stand still. They looked back. It was Ha Yurak. She was standing with her arms folded, glowing with red flames. She looked at Hyunsu, pressed into the wall, and said the super rookie wasn't doing well. Smiling, Ha Yurak praised him, saying that he had defended the city and that if he had known about the sorceress's presence, he might have even won. Opening her eyes wide, Ha Yurak said that telling him as a future member of the Red Lion Guild next was herself. When Ha Yurak raised her head and clenched her fists, the flames glowed even stronger. The sorceress grinned, thinking that this was a very strong mortal and they didn't expect this. Pushing off the rock on which she stood, Ha Yurak tore toward the serpent. Lifting Hyunsu into the air, Demon patted his shoulder and said, "Let's go, my disciple." Flying over the city, Demon told Hyunsu to consider that this was not a flight, but a strategic retreat. 2 mermaids got to Yoon, and she yelled at them to leave. One of the monsters grabbed her leg, and Yoon waved her arms and cried out that she would not be touched. Through her tears, she screamed and begged for help. An arrow flew into one of the monsters. Then Panther also came up, grabbing the monsters and spreading them out. An explosion sounded next to Panther, and he turned to Chemist and asked her if she wanted him dead, but the huntress smiled and said she knew what she was doing. When the chemist approached Yun, she asked if the girl was okay, and Yun covered her mouth with her hands and squeezed out a thank you. Turning to Panther, the chemist said she would take Yun to the shelter, and Panther said he would look for other survivors. Putting Yun on the water bike, the chemist yelled for the girl to hold on, and off they went. Lying on the floor in one of the destroyed buildings, Hyunsu woke up. The demon was standing at the broken window. Grabbing his side, Hyunsu groaned and asked the teacher what had happened. Without turning around, Demon said that a sorceress controlled the serpent, but if it wasn't for her, Hyunsu would have won. However, he lost. Outraged, Hyunsu asked what demon had brought him here to escape, but Demon reminded him that this was a retreat. Looking back at the explosions outside the window, Demon said there was nothing to worry about. As the shards of glass flew, Hyunsu asked what it was, but Demon finished by saying that this warrior had come to his rescue. Trying to get up, Hyunsu exclaimed like hell. The demon asked what he was talking about. Clenching his fist, Hyunsu looked at the demon and said this snake was his prey. and he wouldn't let anyone take his prey. But the next moment, Hyun-soo groaned and fell to the floor. The demon said that a battle was out of the question with his body so exhausted. Watching Hyun-soo sit down, Demon continued to say that what was needed was meditation energy circulation. He asked who the warrior was, and Hyun-soo replied that she was the leader of the Red Lion Guild, Ha-yurak. There was another explosion, and Demon said that since it was her, she would have no trouble dealing with these two. Trying to get up again, Hyun-soo said that if he started, he should finish it. But Demon noted that the student's body couldn't take it. Hyun-soo turned around and angrily replied that he had lost his parents because of people like that monster. Continuing to yell, Hyun-soo said that his brother is now in the hospital because of those. Clenching his fist, Hyun-soo told the demon that he had gained strength thanks to him, and that he didn't want to give up halfway. Looking at the apprentice, Demon thought he saw talent in him, but didn't expect that the guy could have such a fighting spirit. Hyun-soo's eyes were the same, but there was fire in them. After a while, Demon said there was a way, and Hyun-soo immediately asked what it was. And Demon warned me right away that this method has serious consequences. At this time, Ha-yurak ruthlessly attacked the serpent with one after another strike. Standing on a ruined building, the huntress said she loves water fights. Looking around, Ha-yurak wondered where the damn sorceress had gone. Extending his arms, the demon was performing some kind of ritual, saying that this was an opportunity for Hyun-soo to taste the power that awaited him in the future. The finishing demon said that the student's time was limited, and he should not forget that he was immortal and should not get in the way. The Rusels with their tridents kept trying to attack Ha-yurak. When the huntress spread her arms wide and cried out, her flames blew away all the enemies around her. However, the snake was still alive. Ha-yurak smiled and exclaimed that the snake had been caught. She ran to attack the monster, screaming that she would fry it. There was a massive explosion where the serpent and the huntress were. The sorceress was nearby, and stones from the buildings flew at her, splattering her with blood. Biting her lip, the sorceress thought the Lord would be angry, and she didn't expect to meet her equal here. Seeing the sorceress raise her hands again, Ha-yurak said her tricks wouldn't work now. Standing before the sorceress, Ha-yurak said her worm was in danger, so she came immediately. Ha-yurak told the sorceress she was just in time by showing something with her hand. Upon seeing the flames, the sorceress spread her fingers on her hand and screamed in terror. When the huntress pounced on the sorceress, the serpent howled, and the sorceress screamed for Rataik. Inside Hyun-soo was such a powerful force that his eyes shone with blue light, and he clenched his teeth from exertion. The hologram said that Hyun-soo had temporarily awakened the heavenly demon body's ability. Glancing at the serpent, Ha-yurak asked how she would be without a chiller. When Ha-yurak saw the serpent dive into the water, she began to take off her shoes, saying that this was why she did not wear expensive shoes. Rushing straight after the monster, Ha-yurak shouted that she was done with it and would end it now. She jumped up, and the serpent opened its mouth and breathed fire on her. The impact slammed the huntress into the building. The serpent turned around, and Ha-yurak fell into the water. The monster's eyes burned with red light. A helicopter flew to the crash site. The water had already covered half of the buildings. The helicopter pilots radioed the captain that the evacuation of the citizens was complete. Under the water, Ha-yurak heard that the area around her was free. When she opened her eyes, the huntress flew out of the water. She screamed that she was one of this land's 9 S-class hunters. Her name is Ha-yurak. Turning to the snake, the huntress said that she had blown up all the buildings around it, and it had nowhere else to hide. Standing up, Ha-yurak told the snake that it was finished. Suddenly, a voice behind her said, "Wait." Looking around, Ha-yurak saw Hyun-soo, and he took her hand to stop her. Still trying to get to the place was Lee Min-na, who thought that Hyun-soo couldn't do it alone because he had little combat experience. While running past a store with sports equipment, Lee Min-na noticed a display case of cast iron weights. She went to the checkout counter and the clerk told her the price was 1,500 won. Lee Min-na took out the money. When she went outside, she threw the weight to the ground and it fell with a thud. The seller came out to return the change but saw Lee Min-na gesture with 2 fingers, and the kettlebell rose into the air. She continued to rotate her fingers and watched the kettlebell repeat her movements and spin in circles. Lee Min-na tossed the weight into the air and flew up with it. Seeing this, a random male passerby stopped and opened his mouth. Looking at Hyun-soo, Ha-yurak smiled incomprehensively and asked why he had come. Hyun-soo smiled back and said he would kill the snake, but Ha-yurak said he wouldn't because the snake had pissed her off too. Continuing to talk, Ha-yurak told Hyun-soo that she would be more cooperative if he promised her to join the Red Lion Guild. Looking at Hyun-soo-ha, Yurak felt a bit energized. She knew the guy was talented, but now he was like a taut string. Before she knew it, Hyun-soo was rushing to attack the snake. The huntress was indignant that she hadn't even noticed. Clenching his fists, Hyun-soo applied crushing blows from the first-level heavens. While striking the snake, Hyun-soo performed the seed-burning technique. Facing the serpent, Hyun-soo used the crushing blows from the second level of heaven, burning root technique. An explosion appeared on the monster's snout, and blood spurted. The serpent roared angrily. Looking at the apprentice, Demon thought that with the ritual he had increased his stamina to unimaginable heights. How did Hyun-soo also grab a part of the heavenly demon's muscle memory passed down from generation to generation? Again, Hyun-soo applied the heavenly demon flight. The monster tried to grab its opponent. Trying to keep up with the guy, the snake was smashing all the buildings along the street with its vast and long torso. Soaring into the air, Hyun-soo applied crushing blows from the third-level heavens. The attack was called leaf burning. Wounds began to open all over the serpent's body, and blood spurted. In the end, Hyun-soo was able to destroy the snake. The creature exploded, and only pieces of him remained. Ha Yurak, who was watching this, opened her mouth and thought this couldn't be. Lee Mi-na, who was holding the weight, joined her. She too looked at Hyun-soo with astonishment and asked how it was possible. Ha Yurak looked back at her and said with a smile that Lee Mi-na was late. While looking at the guy, Lee Mi-na asked if it was really Hyun-soo Shu, and Ha Yurak noticed that Lee Mi-na's cheeks were blushing and made a face. Galagram notified Hyun-soo that his temporary awakening ability had been terminated. Hyun-soo thought as if he already had. He bent over sharply and vomited blood. Unconscious, he began to fall downward. The two huntresses rushed to save him. The demon thought he had snatched two of the best beauties. When Yoon came home, her brother and sister ran out crying. Falling on her knees in front of them, Yoon also cried and hugged them tightly. The kids were rubbing their eyes and screaming, and Yoon said she was so glad they were okay. Sitting on the bike and talking on the phone, the chemist announced that she had taken Yoon home and asked what was up with the person she was talking to. On the other end of the wire was Panther, who said that the situation was improving and that Ha Yurak had dealt with the sorceress. The wounded behind him had been evacuated. Panther also reported that an unknown hunter had destroyed the snake, and chemist clenched her teeth. Panther also said their water level has decreased to almost zero, so it should go down soon in other places too. Standing next to the children, Yun heard the chemist shouting to her from the street that the danger was over and that she could be calm. Looking out the window, Yun shouted thanks to the huntress and yelled for her to take care of herself. The chemist looked back and waved her hand. Hyun-soo sighed and bit his lip in pain as he lay in the hospital. Exiting the bed, he saw Demon and asked where he was. He couldn't remember anything and asked what had happened if he had been defeated. The demon clucked and said he had a bad memory. The demon sternly asked Hyun-soo if he couldn't remember anything, and the disciple looked at him questioningly. Realizing that he didn't remember anything, Demon revealed that Hyun-soo had lost his memory after applying crushing blows from the heavens. In a rage, Demon said he was thinking of how he could punish the bastard who dared to hit him with his crushing blows, and Hyun-soo cried out in fright. Ha! Yurak rushed into the room and shouted, "Greetings, Super Rookie!" followed by Lee Mi-na, who smiled and held a basket of flowers. Running through the water, the hunters shouted that they had to kill every last one of them. They were clearing the streets of mermaids. At the moment, the association and guilds are busy searching for and killing the remaining fish people. In a TV interview, Choi Hyun-woo said that they are conducting a sweep of the city to calm the citizens. At one house, air bubbles suddenly appeared in the bathroom water. Lee Mi-na peeled apples at the hospital and sliced them onto a plate. While forking apples, Ha Yurak held them up to Hyun-soo's face and said, "Say a Lee Mi-na," resented that she was the one who peeled them. Looking back at her, Ha Yurak asked why she was so petty. If she didn't like it, then she let her feed him herself and stuck her fork in Hyun-soo's mouth. Waving her fork, Ha Yurak said to Mina to Hyun-soo, "Already." The guy wondered what she was talking about. Mina removed the box and said she could have done it without her instructions. Inside was a small red ball. Mina said it was the monster's heart, and Ha Yurak exclaimed that it was his reward. The demon saw it as an elixir. The demon leaned closer and said he had never met an elixir of such power before. Sitting down beside her, Mina smiled and said that monster hearts were the substance left behind after the death of a rather ancient monster. Looking back at Hyun-soo, Yurak said that if he ate the heart, his stats would increase manifold. For a low-class hunter, it would increase his class. Folding her hands, Yurak said that this snake wasn't that big, but it was very harmful if it had such a heart. Licking Demon said this elixir contained 500 years of chi energy charge. Yi Hyun-soo asked why they gave him this incredible artifact. Yurak ruffled his hair to make him think they were incredibly kind. Yurak's behavior didn't please Mina. She yelled that the heart didn't even belong to them and that the victory was still Hyun-soo's. And Yurak asked where Mina was. Snov smiled. Mina looked at Hyun-soo and said that you need to know how to use the heart properly, but she would tell him everything as soon as he was discharged. However, Yurak asks Hyun-soo why he would listen to her when he has her as an S-class hunter, and Mina screams that the class doesn't give her knowledge of everything. Yurak asked what Mina could have known about this class if she had never been there. The demon smiled and sat in the lotus position, watching the tigresses fight. Leaning toward Hyun-soo and smiling broadly, Demon asked whom he would marry, and the disciple rolled his eyes. Hearing Hyun-soo say teacher, the girls turned questioningly at him and the guy said ouch. It was already evening and Yurak was still in the hospital. She stood in the hallway, clutching her head. Looking through the door, she saw Mina showing some papers to Hyun-soo. Mina said they made changes to the contract, and this is Hyun-soo's chance. Such a chance may not exist in the future. Looking at Hyun-soo, Mina's eyes lit up. She knew that he would have no problem rising to the S-class, and if she recruited him, she would save his reputation. Looking at the contract, Hyun-soo's lips tightened, and he could only mumble when Mina asked what he thought. As she left the room, Mina told Yurak it was her turn. Yurak looked suspiciously at the competitor passing by. After entering the room, Yurak plopped down on the bed, and Hyun-soo shrieked. Fixing his hair, Yurak asked if he liked the association's offer. The demon thought these enchantresses would convince him to join, but he didn't need to. Listening to Yurak say that he has no doubt that the conditions are attractive, Hyun-soo looked away. Leaning over to him, Yurak said that surely they must have offered him immunity from criminal liability if he caused people to die. Looking up at Yurak, Hyun-soo asked how she knew that, but the huntress said it was apparent. She snorted and said that Hyun-soo would soon rise to S-class and an awakened S-class didn't need immunity. Raising her index finger, Yurak said that the power now is not with those who have nuclear weapons or money. They are the S-class hunters. She asked who was going to give them immunity, and it was ridiculous. The demon agreed that it was logical. Turning away, Yurak said that the only thing Hyun-soo needed before he reached S-class was patronage. Leaning sharply again, the huntress slapped her chest and said that he needed the patronage of Red Lion Guild leader Ha Yurak. As she left the chamber, Yurak waved her hand and wished Director Lee good luck. Seeing a smiling Mina in the doorway, Hyun-soo sighed and said he was sorry. Lowering her eyes to the floor, Mina said she could do nothing since she wouldn't force him. Fixing her hair, Mina moved towards the door and told Hyun-soo to get well and better. Suddenly, Hyun-soo called out to her, apologized, and asked if he could ask her for something. Mina looked around and stopped. With sadness in his voice, Hyun-soo said that he knows it's pointless to ask her for anything, but he's so broken he can't even get out of bed. He said he was asking the association to help him. The demon leaned on the back of the bed and asked if insolence was second best. A new day came, and Yoon entered the room, turned on the light, and told the kids to wake up because it was time for breakfast. As the kids got up and rubbed their eyes, Yoon reminded them that it was the weekend, which meant she had to go to work. Sis left the room asking why she had left so early. Her brother followed her, his eyes closed and Yoon trailing behind him. While the kids were brushing their teeth, my brother asked why they couldn't sleep before breakfast, but my sister said they couldn't, and that was that. From the bathroom, the mermaid watched them listen to the sibling ask if commoners survive. As Yoon was stirring the soup in the bathroom, a rumbling sound and strange sharp noises startled her. Suddenly, the children came running out of the bathroom, followed by a giant mermaid kicking the door. Reaching for the knife lying on the table, Yoon screamed. She watched as the mermaid grabbed her sister. Rusel opened his mouth and lifted the girl to his teeth. The sister screamed once, and Yoon grabbed her little brother. Yoon took the knife to the monster, yelling for it to let the girl go. Running up to the monster, Yoon stabbed it with all her might. However, this only made the mermaid more angry. He threw Yoon back against the other wall with his paw, and she fell. Her sister remained in his clutches. Yoon fell onto the kitchen counter and dropped the pot from the stove, hitting her head on the wall and losing consciousness. Her younger brother was hiding behind the wall, crying. Limina burst into the apartment, yelling at the mermaid to stop. Then she struck the monster's body with the kettlebell, and it howled in pain, releasing the child from her arms. Turning back to Limina, Russell saw that she was floating in the air, and all around her were knives and splinters from the door, pointing in his direction. Making a gesture with her hands forward, Limina shouted, "Catch!" and all her weapons swung at the mermaid. The monster roared from the wounds that appeared on its body. Limina's hands lit up with a green orb, and she shouted for him to go to his kin in hell. She attacked the monster and asked if Ha-Yun was okay. The girl was sitting on her knees with her brother beside her little sister. Looking up, a tearful Yun thanked Limina and asked how she knew they needed help. The huntress said that Hyun-soo had asked her. The doctors came to Hyun-soo's room asking how he was, and their eyes opened wide in surprise. It was about his movements. After removing all the bandages, Hyun-soo said that although his body was still heavy, it no longer hurt. The doctor said it was the first time he'd seen such a speedy recovery, despite Hyun-soo not being a hunter. And the nurse was outraged that he had ripped off the cast. When Hyun-soo went to the cash register, the girl informed him that the Red Lion Guild had already paid all the bills and he could go. As Hyun-soo walked down the street, he smiled with a full mouth and marveled that the guild had done everything. Demon also said that Yurak took good care of his people. Taking out his phone, Hyun-soo thought that Yurak probably had little money left after paying his bills. But when Hyun-soo saw the notification on his phone, he cried out and opened his mouth. The demon asked why he couldn't close his mouth. Continuing to count the zeros, Hyun-soo saw a figure of 600 million. But Demon didn't understand what the disciple was talking about, so he asked, and Hyun-soo explained that it was a down payment from the Red Lion Guild. He was just shaking with joy and jumping up and down in the middle of the street, saying it couldn't be. Demon asked his student if he had lost his mind from so much gold, and Hyun-soo said that Demon just didn't know what it was like to be a beggar. Hyun-soo also said how Demon might know what it's like to walk into a store every day and see ramyun but not be able to buy it. Taking the apprentice by the coif, Demon said they had an urgent matter and flew into the air. Asking what was wrong, Hyun-soo was told that he urgently needed to prepare ramyun for the teacher. Back in the apartment, Hyun-soo and the demon again went into another dimension. Sitting across from the apprentice, Demon said that absorbing the elixir by 10% would give him a chi energy boost of 20 years. But suppose Hyun-soo learns the demon's methodology. In that case, the number will increase to 7,000%, equal to 140 years. The demon also asked what Hyun-soo would do with such power when he gained it, and the guy lowered his head and said that the portal had had an impact 2 years ago. He was referring to the event when the portals opened. It took so many lives, and then he and Yoon lost their parents. Clenching his fist, Hyun-soo said he was now a hunter and would not allow people to experience such grief. Rubbing his beard, the demon said that the invasion of monsters may be the arrival of the great hordes, about which he was told by his ancestors. With a stern look, Demon asked if Hyun-soo remembered the techniques he had used during the last fight, but which he had not taught him. Hyun-soo replied that he didn't remember, but he knew. Then the demon said that heavenly demons passed down their divine skills from generation to generation. The first heavenly demon started it to fight back the great hordes one day. After listening to Hyun-soo's story, he said the only problem is that this prediction is not from his dimension. Suddenly, Demon shrieked, saying that it was, and that was another reason why he wanted to return as soon as possible. Limina came to the door of Hyun-soo's house with a piece of paper, saying that she had been told this was his address. Limina took out her phone and flipped through it, thinking that Hyun-soo wasn't sick anymore, but she didn't pick up the phone. However, Hyun-soo set his phone aside on the dresser and saw no notifications from Limina. Trying to get through, Limina considered what she should do since she needed to report what had happened at Yoon's house. At this time, in the portal, Hyun-soo took the monster's heart, and the demon shouted for him to eat it. Watching Hyun-soo open his mouth wide, Demon flicked his forehead, telling him to eat rather than swallow. A lump popped out on Hyun-soo's forehead, and he looked at Demon fearfully. Demon said that if he wasn't his teacher, the guy would eat him to pieces. So Hyun-soo brought the heart to his mouth and bit it, then swallowed it whole. Pulling the handle, Limina realized that the door wasn't even locked. She opened the door ajar and poked her head into the apartment, calling out loudly to Hyun-soo. As she entered the quartier, Limina began to look around and saw the portal. While Hyun-soo was holding his heart in his mouth, Demon told him to even out his heartbeat and listen to it. He stood up because he was laughing. Hyun-soo was drooling, but he didn't swallow the balloon. He listened to Demon say that if he made a mistake, he would be taken away by the Hufflepuff, but he would be alive, but wouldn't come back. They started with the shell, and the first thing Hyun-soo had to do was stop treating the elixir as food and tune into its energy. Turning away, Limina thought it must take so much not cleaning to grow a mold-like portal. She picked up a basin of gloved rags and soaped up the water heartily. But suddenly Limina's phone rang. After picking up the phone, Limina found out that the general manager was looking for her and said she was out of the office but would be there. Looking back at the mold again, Limina said what fear but knew she couldn't clean it all up now. Watching Hyun-soo, Demon said that he now needed to move the energy of the essence into the outer shell of his aura. Strangely enough, the dead snake's heart energy was a fiery yang energy. These portals are home to monsters of incredible power. But Demon thought it was better for them because Hyun-soo would have to change his polarity to yang later. The kilogram stated that the degree of absorption of the substance essence was 32%. Demon said that when the essence completely dissolved in Hyun-soo's aura, it should be concentrated back into the inner shell. The absorption rate of the essence substance had increased to 50%. Hyun-soo clenched his teeth from the tension, but Demon was telling him to be patient. Continuing, the demon shouted that a seed of heavenly demon power was germinating in Hyun-soo and that he should not give up. The absorption rate of the elixir increased to 7,000%, and a fountain of blood was spurted out from Hyun-soo's nose. Hyun-soo was in a deep trance, and Demon saw it. The degree of assimilation increased by another 10%. Hyun-soo reflected that he had only expected 770. Still, it was already 80%, so he had to wait as long as possible. His eyes were bleeding. The degree of assimilation was already 90%. There was still 10% left, but blood was gushing out of all the orifices. The demon was pleased with this outcome and praised his apprentice, saying he would help him finish what he had started. He sat behind Hyun-soo and channeled the primordial chi energy into him. The disciple's eyes shone with a blue light, and the energy began to release. When Hyun-soo cried out, the blood rushed even more. Sweat was pouring down on him. The hologram said that Hyun-soo's body had reached the yin-yang energy peak and had become immune to thermal effects. The ability to follow cues was improved, and Hyun-soo received a new effect. He would now be able to learn the techniques of any individual once a day. Hyun-soo fell to the ground without strength. People injured in the fight with the fishermen were brought in piles to the hospital. Some were sent to intensive care, and some had to be pumped out on the spot. People were sitting and lying in the corridors, and doctors were running around like crazy, trying to give everyone the help they needed. Limina arrived at the hospital. As she looked around, she realized she had nowhere to go, all because of the fish people. Limina looked into one of the rooms, went to Yoon's bed, and asked her how she was feeling. The girl replied that she was feeling better. Limina asked if Yoon had already been informed that her brother and sister had been transferred to Sasong Medical Center. But Yoon only wondered if they were okay. Leaning on her arm and closing her eyes, Limina told me they hadn't regained consciousness yet. Limina explained that it was one of the strange symptoms of fish people. After stroking Yoon's head, Limina told her not to worry. Everything would be fine. Walking out into the hallway, Limina called Hyun-soo again, but he didn't retake the call. Limina wondered how it could have happened that Ha-yun was hurt the most. Overall, Limina was still willing to realize that Sister Yoon hadn't regained consciousness because she had fainted from fear. The younger brother, however, was not touched by the fish man. Then why are they both in comas? Standing in front of Yurak, the man said that the damage to the city was estimated at 1 billion won. 117 people were injured, and more were arriving every minute. Sitting in the chair, Yurak folded her hands and listened to him say that the doctors had noticed people going into comas after being attacked by the fishermen. The man said that while doctors were looking for the condition's cause, Yurak said they're not doctors anyway, so it's not in their area of expertise, and she told the man he could go. Yurak picked up the phone and called Hyun-soo, but he didn't pick up, so she thought he had joined the guild and wasn't answering the leader's calls. Jurak's face turned red, and she shrieked that he was doing this after she had discounted his 600 million won salary. Two men were sitting in one of the bars. One of them took a beer in a tin can and opened it. S-class hunter and leader of one of the guilds, Haxon Baldur, sat in the chair. He asked the other if Jurak had taken him in the end. The man with the beer-drinking beer was Jill Lordman, an S-class hunter who didn't belong to any guild. He said he was quite impressive. Glaring angrily, Haxon asked how she had managed to smell him. He smiled and said he would have finished the newcomer off. But Gil told Huxon to cut the crap and offered to live in peace without the carnage. And Huxon said he'd rather kill a newcomer than let the Ha-Yurak Guild rise to prominence. On the beach near the sea, Hyun-soo sat on a lounge chair. He closed his eyes and slept. Limina approached him, touched his shoulder, and said he must be exhausted. A voice sounded nearby. Hyun-soo turned around and saw Yurak and another girl holding a beach ball. The girl cheerfully asked Hyun-soo if he had forgotten they would play volleyball. The girl threw the ball at him and yelled that whoever loses pays for lunch. The ball hit Hyun-soo's head and Limina cried out. The girls laughed, saying he couldn't even hit a ball like that. They shouted for him to get the ball, and Hyun-soo rubbed his face and said it was his first time playing volleyball. The ball fell into the water, and Hyun-soo thought how far it had traveled. But when he reached for it, the ball sank into the water. A giant snake that Hyun-soo had recently killed came out of the water. The serpent screamed for Hyun-soo to give him back the potion. He dragged Hyun-soo under the water. Underwater, Hyun-soo thought it was underwater lava because the water was boiling. As he continued falling, Hyun-soo sank deeper under the water. Then he woke up. When he saw that the student was awake, Demon told him to quickly make him a ramyun. Hyun-soo asked if it was a dream. Pointing his finger at the clock, Demon said that the big needle on this plate had already passed the number 12 5 times, and Hyun-soo realized that he had slept for 2 days. Limina was on the phone at the association office, yelling about what you said. She yelled directly into Hyun-soo's phone, asking what he was listening to when she said he could die if he ate the elixir on his own. At the Red Lion Guild office, Jurak opened her mouth and asked him if he had just eaten the elixir and slept for 2 days. Sighing, Jurak asked what to do with him, and then said he was alive, and thank goodness for that. Smiling, Hyun-soo thought that Jurak was reacting much more calmly than he expected. While feeding Demon Ramyeon simultaneously, Hyun-soo said he'd be in touch. Chattering, he poked the noodle sticks in Demon's face, and the latter said that the student was a rascal. Hyun-soo shouted enthusiastically as he looked at the gallograph, indicating his level had risen. The bump on his forehead that the demon had left still hadn't gone away. Following the clues, it was upgraded to level 3, and Hyun-soo carefully read what was included in that level. The apprentice jumped around the room, shouting that he had a new ability. Demon asked what he was so happy about. Clenching his fists, Hyun-soo explained to Demon that he could perform a technique once a day that Demon hadn't taught him. As the face, Cheon-young pointed out, Demon said that such an ability does not exist, and even if it does, it sounds dishonest. Dancing around the demon, Hyun-soo shouted that the ability existed and that the demon could not doubt it. The demon wanted to poke him in the forehead again. Watching the disciple cover himself, Demon asked what he was dodging. Hyun-soo replied that his forehead was not within the range of Demon's slaps. Demon looked at his hand and thought about how Hyun-soo had learned to dodge. The boy continued to dance behind him. When Hyun-soo came to the clinic, he visited Yoon. They sat on a bench in the hallway, and he said he understood. Yoon covered her face with her hands and asked what if her brother and sister never regained consciousness. Hyun-soo looked at her with regret. Stroking the girl's back, Hyun-soo said they would regain consciousness. He added that he and she looked alike, and Yoon wiped her tears and raised her head. They walked to another room and stopped at the bed where a young man was lying. Hyun-soo said it was Hyun-tae, his younger brother. He said that ever since they crashed the car, his brother had never regained consciousness. Tears rolled down Yoon's cheeks. Hyun-soo said that the doctors couldn't explain anything. Taking the boy's hand, Yoon leaned over him and through her tears said, "Poor thing." Holding her hand, Yoon said hello and told her name, and that Hyun-soo Appa had done much for her. She also added that she doesn't know if Hyun-dae has heard from her, but Hyun-soo Appa is looking forward to him returning for a long time. Standing beside Hyun-soo, I listened to Yoon asking Hyun-tae to hurry back. Demon was also in the room with them, and he said that Hyun-dae was giving off a strange aura. Hyun-soo looked at him questioningly, and Demon told me a curse had been placed on his brother's heart. Looking at the lying boy, Demon said there was one way to get around it. An auction was being held in a city building. A woman asked the audience who would give more than 70 million won for a skeletal spear. In the hall, one person raised 2 fingers in the air. He was a man with long black hair and a red shirt. The woman at the table said that Choi Jae-hyuk Nim, the leader of the Aegis Guild, accepted the 80 million lot. She started counting to 3. Everyone looked behind Choi Jae-hyuk's back to look at him, but he just laughed. However, no sooner had she announced that the lot was sold than a new hand went up from another man in a blue hoodie. Biting his lip, Choi Jae-hyuk thought he was a jerk, and the item was sold to this stranger. Walking down to the parking lot holding the spear, the man unlocked the car and thought, what a productive day it was. Someone called his name, Jin Si-hyuk, and he turned around, looking suspiciously at the person approaching. It was Jae Hyuk. Standing with his hands in his pockets, he asked Sho Hyuk if he was crazy to pay 200 million for a thing that cost no more than 70. While pointing his finger at the spear, Sho Hyuk said he would spare 300 million for this. Putting the spear away in the car, Si Hyuk said that if Jae Hyuk saw a price of 200 million and clutched his heart, then what would he be doing at the auction in the first place? Jae Hyuk didn't like how he spoke and kicked his offender's car with his foot. Seeing the car slam into the wall, Sho Hyuk jumped aside and looked questioningly at Jae Hyuk. And Jae Hyuk asked Sho Hyuk if he was tired of living, but Sho Hyuk turned around abruptly. And he said he'd try his new acquisition on someone who'd get in his own way. Iron gloves appeared on Jae Hyuk's hands, and he said that Sho Hyuk would see for himself that the weapon was worth 70 million and no more. However, Sho Hyuk rushed to attack Jae Hyuk with a spear, telling him not to try to appear cooler than he was. And they started the battle. Sho Hyuk attacked with his spear, and Jae Hyuk used his iron gloves. Jae Hyuk punched his opponent's face with a clenched fist, and Si Hyuk flew upwards. Smiling and fixing his gloves, Jae Hyuk said he didn't know if Si Hyuk was aware. Still, no one had ever left alive after outbidding him at an auction. Red Lion Guild building. Jurak had Jae Hyuk standing in his office. The leader yelled at him, asking if he would continue to cause them problems. Jurak continued shouting, saying she'd been inundated with complaints about his antics. Jae Hyuk scratched the back of his head and smiled. Jae Hyuk leaned forward and spread his hands apart, saying he couldn't help but be angry because Sho Hyuk had just come and taken his item from him at the auction. Pointing a finger at him, Jurak said that if he continued, she would not broach the subject any further. Clenching her teeth, Jurak angrily said that if he made trouble again, she would tear him apart and then burn him. When he finished talking, Jurak told him to get out, and Jae Hyuk left the office by loudly slamming the door. Suddenly, he looked into the office again, extended his index finger and said, "But..." Jurak interrupted him, asking what else he had. Smiling, Jae Hyuk asked when Jurak was going to introduce him to that new A-rank hunter, and the leader shouted that it was none of his business. Opening one eye, Jae Hyuk said he wouldn't set up a hierarchy or anything. Threatening with her fiery fist, Jurak yelled for him to get out, and Jae Hyuk slammed the door, asking him not to say anything. Putting his hands in his pocket and walking down the hallway, Jae Hyuk concluded that he would meet Hyun-soo soon. In the evening, Hyun-soo told Yoon about the events that had happened. She clapped her hands and asked if he was also a hunter. Scratching his head, Hyun-soo said he didn't think becoming awakened had any time limit, and Yoon exclaimed that it was great. Thinking about it, Yoon said that in that case, it wasn't surprising that someone as high-ranking as Mihan Oni had helped him, and Hyun-soo laughed in response. Hyun-soo said he would visit Hyun-dae and her brother and sister, and she should take it easy and get some rest. Returning to his brother's room, Hyun-soo asked Demon what method could help him. Folding his hands on his chest, Demon said that the method is chopping Heaven's tongue. After glancing at his disciple, Demon said he couldn't use this method now, and Hyun-soo asked why. This secret technique is a sorcery invented by one of the heavenly demons. The demon said Hyun-soo couldn't use it because he didn't have the body of a celestial demon, but the guy said he could. Responding to Demon Hyun-soo's questioning look, he reminded him that he had increased his level and could now repeat any training technique once a day. Extending his hand and pointing it at his brother, Hyun-soo heard a voice say that he was imitating a superior level skill. A beam of light appeared in his hand and was directed at Hyun-dae. Hyun-soo said it really worked. Standing at the disciple's back, Demon thought it was possible what kind of ability this was. Around the lying brother appeared blue runes folded into a circle similar to a seal. The demon said that Hyun-soo needed to increase his chi output. Brother's heart started beating again. A light flashed, accompanied by a shockwave. Yi Hyun-soo was thrown backward. Falling to the floor, he stared at the sparks and smoke by his brother's bedside, wondering why nothing had worked. The demon said he felt the power of a mighty being and asked the student not to be upset, explaining that he didn't have enough power. In the office, Huxon said they need all the strong hunters they can get. Jill asked what he was going to do about the kid, but Huxon said Jill wouldn't change his mind. The door to the office opened, and Jill turned around. Looking at the person who entered, Jill said, "Takeshi, you're back." It was Yamamoto Takeshi, an S-class hunter and vice leader of the S Guild. Sitting at the bar, Takeshi and Jill drank one can after another. Takeshi said that was why he didn't want to work for Huxon. Finishing the can, Jill suggested he be on his own like he was, and then asked what was up with the fragment this time. Takeshi stared at the floor in silence. And then he replied that it wasn't the same as last time. There was only a deserted desert, and Jill sighed. Jill also suggested looking for a new piece in Korea, and Takeshi said that since it was entrusted to the Red Lions, we'd have to wait and see. Jill said that the hunter's appearance, Park Hyun-soo, might advance the search for the fragment. Takeshi agreed with him and said that an expedition would be coming soon. Jill also said that if the boss of heaven is the ancestor of the dragons, then the portals scattered around the world are fragments of heaven. It's like a curse to collect all the pieces in a year. Somewhere in other universes, the monsters thought that they were wrong if people thought this was it. If they don't get all the fragments in 1 year, then this world will face a calamity that even the S-classes can't handle. Clenching his teeth, Takeshi said they should find all the fragments in a year, no matter what it took. Pounding his fist on the table, Takeshi said they needed more high-ranking hunters. Jill agreed. Hyun-soo went to another hospital to visit Yoon's brother and sister, but they were still unconscious. A nurse stood next to him and looked at them sadly. The nurse said they had done all they could, and there was nothing more they could do except put a heating pad on them. She returned to the other bed and announced that many such patients were in this ward, and Hyun-soo turned around. He saw a woman sitting by the bedside of a man with a child. She asked when her husband would wake up, but the nurse said she could not tell her anything. The demon standing beside him said it was because of the cold energy. Hyun-soo didn't understand what he was talking about and asked again. And Demon recalled that Hyun-soo himself said that all these people met with the fish people. Creatures underwater initially carry yin energy, and these water monsters have potent yin energy. That's why those with high yin energy can't accept it. When their yin energy collides with the watery energy, it combines and becomes cold. It's like they go into hibernation. Now Hyun-soo understood everything and asked if there was any energy to cure them. And the demon said to use the yang energy to remove the yin energy, then they'll wake up soon. The woman's son in the room with Hyun-soo pointed his finger at him and told his mom to look. The woman jumped up. She approached Hyun-soo and asked him what he was doing to keep the children stable. Hyun-soo lifted the boy off the bed. Suddenly, the woman's son yelled out that he knew Hyun-soo and that he had killed Imugi. The woman leaned over to see what her son showed her on his phone. Hyun-soo put his hand on the boy's abdomen, and energy shone there. A black haze of yin energy began to slowly come out of him. Pointing his index finger, Demon told Hyun-soo to burn the yin energy. While doing the ritual with the boy, Hyun-soo said he thought he could absorb the yin energy. Spreading his hands, Demon shouted that Hyun-soo's body was at extreme yang, and that he didn't know what would happen to him if he absorbed the yin. But Hyun-soo didn't reply anything and proceeded to absorb the yin energy. Angry that his disciple didn't listen to him, Demon called Hyun-soo a brat. Hyun-soo's lips tightened with tension. The voice told him that he had completely absorbed the yin energy, and now his body was moving into the harmony of yin and yang. The demon marveled at the peak of 3 flowers above the student's head. Even though it was only for a moment, Demon was sure he had seen Hyun-soo reach the peak blooming stage of the 3 flowers in a trance. Turning to Demon, Hyun-soo asked what a body with yin and yang harmony meant. Looking at him in bewilderment, Demon thought about his ability to do such a thing. Suddenly, Brother Yoon came to his senses and asked where he was. The woman and her son screamed. The boy turned around and saw Hyun, and Hyun-soo said he was glad the boy recognized him. Running out of the room, the woman waved her arms and called for the doctor and nurse. Everyone gathered around the bed, and Hyun pulled the same thing with the boy's sister. The doctors watched him closely. The girl woke up, and the woman, her son, and the nurse were moved by what they saw. The doctor stood there with his mouth hanging open. After calling Yoon Hyun with the good news, the girl in the hospital hallway cried. Clutching the phone to her chest, Yoon flooded with tears and thanked Hyun several times. The hospital reported that the number of comatose patients is growing so fast that they don't have enough beds. After hearing the report, Limina said she would ask the department head to increase the number of hospital beds and staff. At the same time, Limine and Yurak called to report the news about Hyun-soo's actions. They both couldn't believe their ears. Hyung brought not only Yoon's brother and sister to their feet, but also the woman's husband. When the man woke up, the son and wife cried joyfully. When he saw the kilogram on which it was written that Hyun had reached the first level with the harmony of yin and yang, the man was very happy and clenched his fist. The woman squeezed Hyung's hand, tearfully thanking him and calling him a hunter, saying that God must have sent him there, and Hyung said he did what he could. Turning to the doctor, he asked if they were going to the next room, and the doctor, opening the door, smiled and said yes. That day, Hyung pulled many people out of their comas. He walked with a crowd of cheering people and smiled at the children beside him. Women called Hyun amazing since he had this ability, and men asked to take pictures with him. Looking at the crowd, Demon smiled and said it was good. Hyun looked at him questioningly. With a sniffle, the demon asked if people weren't praising him. And as a heavenly demon, he should be used to that. Hearing that, Hyun was embarrassed. When Hyun called Yurak, he told her he was in Saesun Hospital, and she said she already knew. Standing in the middle of the office, Yurak explained that the association had sent them a request for help from the hospitals. Smiling, Yurak added that it was not for nothing because the association sent them a check, and Hyun could take whatever they sent. Grabbing the hair on his head, Hyun said he was just a guild member, so how could he take the money? But Yurak reminded him that it was spelled out in the contract. When Hyun announced that he would head over to her as soon as he was done at the hospital, Yurak praised him for doing a great job. The phone rang in Huxon's house at night. The man sat on the couch with his arms folded across his chest and his eyes closed. When Huxon picked up the phone, he heard his subordinate say he had found out where Park Hyun-soo lived. Getting up from the couch and grabbing his jacket, Huxon told the employee to send him the address. Huxon turned the doorknob, stepped outside, and put on his jacket. Huxon accelerated and sprinted forward. It raced like a comet, leaving only a bright trail in the sky. With a horrified look at Demon, Hyung asked if he was still tired of the ramyeon. But Demon reminded him that Hyung had called the soup the best food in the world. Walking towards the stove, Hyun saw that the guild leader was calling him. When he picked up the phone, he asked why she was calling him at this hour. But Yurak was yelling into the phone asking where Hyung was. The guy pulled the phone away from his ear. Smiling, he replied that he was at home and was going to cook, and Yurak yelled at him to get out of there. Behind Hyung's back, the demon said something powerful was coming. Hyung turned around with his mouth hanging open. Hyung ran out of the apartment and ran up the stairs. As he ran to the roof, Hyung saw a red flash in the sky. That flash from the explosions landed on the ground so that even the hatch covers flew into the air. The dust blocked the view, but Hyung could see a man behind it. It was Huxon. He smiled and said Hyung's name. A purple orb appeared in his hand, and his eyes also shone. He said he would finish off Hyun. Hyun watched in horror as the arrow aimed by the stranger rushed at him. There was an explosion where Hyun had just stood, and pieces of buildings flew up. A siren was blaring in the association building. A man looking at the computer reported that an unidentified living organism had appeared in Hyun-soo's neighborhood. Frowning her eyebrows, Limina thought that supersonic speed is rare even among S-classes, which means it's most likely this. Talking on the phone, Yurak said she thought it was Huxon because that asshole hates her to the core. Taking off her high-heeled shoes, Yurak thanked her interlocutor for the information. She said she was the only one who could handle Huxon. Clenching her fists, Limina thought she should go to help too. Suddenly, a mustachioed man came in and told Limina not to go anywhere. When she turned around, she saw the CEO of the association. Looking at the employee from under his bushy gray eyebrows, the director said that judging by his looks, there would be a battle between S-class hunters. Going it is pointless. After sitting down, the director folded his hands and said the association wouldn't be left out either. They had already asked the Azure Dragon Squad to begin preparations. At this time, other hunters were also rushing to the battle site on motorcycles. Turning around, a man in a black and yellow suit told Ant B and Cheetah to get ready because an S-class was waiting for them. It was a whole different level from what they had before. Over the radio, the Azure Dragon leader asked Falcon if he had the mirror world. Smiling, Falcon announced that he was on his way. He was standing on the roof of one of the houses on the street since he had that mirror world. Jumping off the roof of a high-rise, Falcon flew down with his arms open, and then suddenly he turned into the bird he was named after. Looking at Hyun-soo, Huxon thought that no one knew that Hyun had also obtained the power of Yin. He has reached the realm of evolution. The demon looked at his apprentice and thought that the speed of his growth was astounding, but the power that emanated from him was much stronger than from Yurak. Squinting, Hyun asked his opponent why he came out of nowhere and attacked him. Without answering, Haxon frowned and wondered how the A-class could parry his attack. The people behind Hyun's building heard a sound from the street and thought there was an accident somewhere nearby. When Hyung heard them, he looked up and shouted that it was dangerous here and they should all leave. Demon told Hyung to focus because he had a battle to fight. Huxon had already used the color art attack twice against Hyun. After successfully repelling it, Hyun smiled and asked why he was using the same attack twice and why he thought it would work. But suddenly, Huxon's voice said behind Hyung that he was an idiot. Hyung didn't expect his opponent to be behind him. And Huxon used the body transformation. Metal crystals began to grow one by one on his arm. Watching the enemy's body being covered in metal, Hyun was horrified. After all, he had just fired energy bullets. how many powers he had. Extending his spiked metal fist forward, Huxin used a supersonic three-swing kick. After managing to put up a block, Hyun protected his face but still flew backward. Huxin hit the ground with all his might. There was an explosion, and Hyun flew upward, hitting his head on the ground. Looking down, Hyun realized he couldn't feel his right hand and thought no one knew he would end up like this, even after receiving internal energy. In the hole that Hyun had punched with his body, Huxin appeared ready to continue the fight. Swinging again, he applied a supersonic strike attack of 5 swings. Suddenly, a voice sounded behind Hyun's back, asking him if he had studied heavenly demon movement for nothing. Listening to the instructions was activated, and the heavenly demon's flight comprehension level increased to 57%. Rushing forward at the enemy, Hyun used the second heavenly demon movement technique. Getting close to Huxin, Hyun shouted that it was now his turn. He hit with all his might, and an explosion sounded. Huxin flew into the wall of another building. Across the sky, a fiery comet flew Jurak, hoping they hadn't met yet. She also wondered how long Hyun would last against Huxin if they met. 10 or 20 seconds, but it would be over in a moment, so Jurak decided she had to hurry. At this time, Huxin approached the Hyun sealed into the wall and said how strange. As Huxin got closer, he thought he'd finish him off in one punch. Watching them, Demon thought that even though his disciple's comprehension level wasn't that high, he could attack the real one right away. Hyun is powerful. The demon also knew that if Hyun couldn't overcome such a challenge, he would probably not be able to grow as a heavenly demon. Swinging again, Huxin said he admired how long Hyun could hold on. Without raising his head, Hyun asked what it was about and added that Huxin was a jerk and he didn't understand him. Suddenly, Hyun shouted, asking what Huxin was talking about. A blue ball appeared in his hands, and the wall around him shattered into pieces. Covering himself with his hand from the rocks flying at him, Huxin squeezed his eyes shut from such a bright light. Hyun used a seed punch attack to move forward at his enemy with an outstretched fist. There was another explosion. A column of dust rose, and rocks flew in all directions. Despite Huxin covering himself with his metal arm, Hyun punched him, and Huxin flew backward. Breaking, Huxin let out a curse and thought the impact was more complex than he would have thought. Looking at his arm, or rather what was left, Huxin couldn't believe that the A-class had destroyed his strengthened arm. For Huxin, it seemed impossible. He applied a silver pulse. Now, Huxin had 2 metal arms instead of 1. The demon thought his recovery was comparable to that of demonic monsters. The demon told the apprentice not to give the enemy a break and to use the wood strike against him. Huxin did just that. Suddenly, drops appeared around Hyun, and when he looked up, he realized it was water. But from where? Looking around, Hyun didn't realize the opponent had vaporized from the impact of the tree. The demon answered his question by saying that his energy was still here, which meant that the enemy was alive. Abruptly, the demon shouted that he was beneath him. Hyun lowered his head and saw Huxin beside him. Grabbing Hyun by the hair, Huxin swung his blade at him and said he would finish him painlessly. Glaring angrily at his enemy, Hyun said he was repeating the same thing and began to use the spell himself. With a wave of his hand, Hyun yelled that it wouldn't work with him and commanded the leaf punch to cut the opponent. This time, Hyun left a wound on his enemy's stomach. Huxin was angry and called the guy a brat through his teeth. Watching Huxin, Hyun saw that he was recovering again. It realized that he had to be destroyed by a series of attacks. But it was too dangerous because there were a lot of people around. Hyun rushed somewhere and remembered that today was a day off and had to get to school. Knowing that the school was on a hill, Hyun thought he should be able to minimize the damage as much as possible. After touching the wound, Huxin realized that it was serious, because even after using the silver pulse, he could not fully recover. Hyun had already reached the top floor, and luckily no one was there, but it took Huxin a couple of seconds to catch up with his target. Aligning with the guy, Huxin asked him what he was trying to do to protect others. When Hyun saw him, he shouted. Immediately, Huxin attacked him, and Hyun flew into the wall again. The explosion destroyed half the floor. Sitting down on the floor, Hyun said that someone like Huxin, who fights even in residential areas, has no right to be a hunter. As soon as Hyun stood up, Huxin again decided to attack him from behind. There was an explosion again. Looking at the massive hole in the floor where Hyun Huxin had fallen, he said that he was beginning to think it was a pity to take his life. Who would have thought he would last so well? Hyun lay face down on the floor amidst the red-hot rocks and dust. He heard Huxin shouting for him to blame his boss for it. After Huxin's next attack, the school was destroyed. The explosions shattered everything into splinters, one by one. Taking to the sky, Huxin watched his creation, Smoke rose into the air beside him. After landing, Haxon stood in front of the wreckage of the building and watched it burn down. Continuing to stand, Huxon thought that the skill assessment in this country was bad because the kid was not in a class, but already in S class. As Huxon was about to leave, a voice sounded behind him, asking if he could come back in that case. Looking back, Huxon saw Hyun-soo flying into the air from under the rubble of the building. Smiling, Huxon laughed and said that Hyun-soo had surprised him again, and Hyun went straight for the enemy. Huxon used the spell again and said he would burn Hyun until he was reduced to ashes. Clenching his teeth, Huxon realized something was wrong with his arm. His bullet energy was gone. This had never happened before. Watching the guy approach him, Huxon thought his body could still function normally. When Hyun approached him, Huxon swung his fist and shouted that it was the end. He tried to throw a punch, but Hyun dodged it. Huxon cursed. In retaliation, Hyun punched him and Huxon flew backward. Then Hyun applied the second technique of the heaven-destroying demonic fists. 5 days ago at Hyun-soo's apartment, in the portal, he was practicing again. He practiced different techniques with Demon. When he sat down to meditate, Demon told him to listen while circulating his energy. The Demon said he also had the heavenly demon seed and another incredible internal image energy, but he couldn't use them properly. Tears rolled down Hyun's cheeks. He said he had more internal energy but didn't feel stronger and asked why. And the Demon replied that the disciple should consider it a deep well. A strong man can bring water 100 times, but a weak man cannot even get water 10 times. The water in the well will not run out. After listening to the teacher, Hyun-soo said that means he must become stronger. Then Demon told Hyun that fighting in battles was the training that would help him become stronger and allow him to use his inner energy. By showing his fist, Demon said that defeating a strong opponent is better than 100 training sessions. And right now, Hyun-soo realized that his first strong opponent was before him. Screaming furiously, Huxon managed to get out from under the rubble. Hyun was amazed he could still stand on his feet after 2 blows from the seed. It even crossed his mind that Huxon might be a monster. On the other hand, his whole body feels like it's talking from this attack. He said Huxon's body was covered entirely in metal through gritted teeth, and no one could have thought Hyun would hit so hard. Looking at his hand, Huxon realized the spell was still unready. Ducking down, Huxon said that although he was called an astral mage, he was also capable of close combat. Attacking Hyun again, Huxon used 5 swings. He struck the young man in the chest and Hyun flew backward. Huxon was behind Hyun's back and said the guy couldn't escape because he would take his head. Demon called Hyun a brat and said he had to get a grip on himself, or his head would fall off. The raging demon shouted for the disciple to use the heavenly demon's soul. Listening to the instructions was activated. The heavenly demon's soul comprehension had increased to 65%. Clenching his teeth, Demon shouted that Hyun should succeed. Demon's eyes shone with light. At the training session, Hyun laughed and said that Demon's soul was too heavy. Demon replied that it would be hard to understand, but one should think along those lines. Raising his index finger, Demon said to take a step back and let his consciousness pass through that point. Remembering this move, Hyun clenched his teeth, and Huxon wrapped his claws around him and said goodbye. But Hyun could use the heavenly demon's soul, and Huxon saw that the guy had disappeared from under his nose in the blink of an eye. Looking straight in front of him, Huxon wondered what it was. He was sure Hyun had just flown toward him at a tremendous speed. A huge glowing ball of light appeared in front of Huxon's face and moved straight toward him. From that ball, Hyun came out at Huxon and shouted "Explode!" Huxon realized that he couldn't block this attack. Opening his hands, Hyun used the wood strike to attack his opponent. Hyun's hands were still on Huxon's body. The young man realized he had fully used his strength to scoop the water out of the well. Huxon's eyes lit up and he looked at Hyun and said it was his turn. Many lifeless bodies were lying on the battlefield. Swords and spears were stuck in the ground everywhere. One of the warriors stood on the hill and shouted to the demon that he would finish him off. The monster asked the celestial demon if he was the only one left and reported exceeding his expectations. The monster also reminded the monster that the heavenly demon had used up most of its strength, so it shouldn't even think that it could defeat him. Smiling, the sky demon said he swore on the honor of his fallen comrades that he would tear the monster's skin dry and eat it to soothe their souls. But the monster replied that he would give the warrior a chance to become his right hand, and he could conquer the world with him. Lava began to surface from the ground under the warrior's feet, and the warrior told the monster to shut up. The monster looked at the warrior questioningly and asked if he had already used all of his internal energy. Clenching his fist, the warrior replied that it was a martial art and heavenly demons could use it without internal energy. The heavenly demon replied that he could borrow powers from nature. Seeing what the demon was doing, the monster exclaimed, "What is it?" The demon replied that it was a heavenly spiritual body. The town watched what was happening on the side where the battle was taking place. People were frightened that an entire school building had been destroyed. The guild leader of the Azure Dragon Guild was approaching the authorized building. Removing his helmet, the leader informed his fighters that they were in position and needed to proceed cautiously. Looking at the wreckage and smoke, the man said an entire area was destroyed. But how could it have been done in 20 minutes? Crouching on one knee, the girl in the white suit began to launch the drone. Her colleague was climbing up the debris behind her. Taking the binoculars, the leader began to survey the area and told the guy next to him that Huxin was hunting Hunsu and he was probably already dead. However, through his binoculars, the leader saw Hyun punching Huxin's face, and the latter did the same in return. The opponents flew in different directions, and as Hyun fell, he asked again why Huxin had come out of nowhere and attacked him. The leader informed his partner that Park Hyun-S is alive and has a melee with Huxin. At Hyung's question, Huxin snorted and said he didn't know what the guy was talking about. Hyung shouted and asked how he didn't know what he was talking about. Smiling, Huxin began to gather around him his energy beam, which had recovered. Hyun saw Huxin get off the ground and fly upward like a rocket. Huxin opened his arms wide and laughed when he was in the sky. Huxin aimed a laser beam at the ground where Hyun was, but Demon managed to grab the guy and flew into the air with him. The laser beam left a large crater in the ground. The leader who was watching asked how they were supposed to stop the monster. Huxin, who was watching, didn't realize what had happened. He saw something push Hyung away and he survived. Just then, the drone found him. The drone was broadcasting live to the association's office. When Limina saw that, she mentally asked Hyung to get up. Sitting down next to Hyun on one knee, the demon forced him up, saying that even though he was his apprentice, he couldn't help him further. Suddenly, Hyun whispered, "Teacher," and Demon looked at him questioningly. The student said it was the master, and he was diving into his mind. In the office, Limina yelled that it was an order and that they must intervene before Park Hyun-soo died. The Azure Dragon Squad was ordered to engage in battle. The leader was not happy about it. He could not move when he saw the whole picture with his own eyes. But suddenly, through the binoculars, the leader saw and informed the others that Hyun had risen. The demon thought it wasn't lovely to interrupt someone's fight, but he couldn't let his apprentice die and had to help him escape. Seeing that the disciple had risen, Demon told Hyun to stop because there was nothing more he could do. However, Hyung said that's not true because the skill he gained from listening to the instructions is the ability to replicate one of the demon's skills. Looking at him, Huxin asked what Hyung was muttering. After all, he thought the guy would only last for one more attack. Clenching his fists, Hyun decided to use a martial art that he could use without internal energy. Hyun shouted, "Heavenly spiritual body," and the demon looked at him in surprise, for he had never taught him this. Huxin shouted that he recognized Hyun as strong but already tired. Rising into the sky, Hyun shouted forward and aimed a punch at his opponent. A massive beam like a laser was directed at the enemy, and Huxin was horrified when he saw it. The mirror world absorbed their energies. When it was absorbed, it split like a mirror. Huxin and Hyun landed back on the ground, facing each other. When they looked up, they saw a giant bird in the sky. It was a falcon. One of the Azure Dragon Guild members wondered why the mirror world had collapsed after one use. Someone shouted Huxin's name, and he looked up to see who was calling him. Yurak flew towards him with a fiery arrow. She landed on the ground with a bang. Yurak looked back at Hyun, but remained silent, and he looked at her questioningly. Smiling, Yurak praised him, and said that Hyung was a fantastic person for holding out against Huxin for so long, but now she would deal with him herself. The Azure Dragon Guild squad member exhaled a sigh of relief because Yurak had arrived in time. Sweat rolled down his face. Smiling evilly, Huxin asked her if she had single-handedly decided to tackle him and laughed. Something sparkled in the sky. Huxin and Yurak looked up. A portal had opened there. Takeshi came out of that portal, followed by Jill. A week ago, at the gate committee, people were sitting around the table discussing the decision they had made. The gate that the ancient dragon spread. Guilds with S-class hunters in each country will be responsible for the paradise. If the gate appears in S-class hunter countries, the guild will choose a guild to go there based on the situation. One of the meeting participants was Huxin. He asked if they would discuss their decision and why they had to unite everyone. Abruptly standing up from the table, Huxon asked how the hell that would happen if humanity's survival depended solely on how strong they were. Pointing a finger at himself, Huxon said that he and the AE's guild would act at their discretion and let those present take note. Yurak stood up from the table, pointed a finger at Huxon, and said that they needed to work on reporting to have any chance of surviving this disaster. Clenching his fist, Huxon said that if he could stop it, humanity would live, or else they would all die. Massive traffic jams formed in the streets of the city. People rushed out and fled without looking back. There were rumors that a gate had opened at the school, and everyone thought monsters were about to appear. The guild leader looked out from his hiding place. He saw that 4 S-class superhumans were there. If they start a battle, it will be a national disaster. Takashi came forward and apologized to Yurak, saying his leader had been stupid again. Huxon shouted, asking what it was, but Jill held him back. And Hyung realized he'd seen this man in a magazine before. He was ranked 8th among the S-classes of the world. Yamamoto Takeshi's divine sword. Putting a hand on his shoulder, Jill asked Huxon to look at what he was. Hyun recognized him as well. He knew him as a space and time mage. Hyung realized that the man he was fighting with was. Pointing with his hand, Jill asked Huxon to stop provoking people. Hyung's eyes went wide as he realized it was Huxon. The German Huxon Baldur was ranked 2nd in the world. Huxon never appeared in newspapers or on television, so no one knows what he looks like. All people knew was that he was very violent. At this time, Takeshi was saying that the AE's guild promised to apologize at the national level and compensate for the damage caused. Frowning and folding her arms across her chest, Yurak said, "Come on, forget it." But suddenly, Hyun put his hand on his heart and shouted that he couldn't forgive him. He screamed that he was attacked for unknown reasons and destroyed the school he went to. With his hands raised to the sky, Hyun continued to yell at the locals for the sudden attack, but Jill interrupted him with a shout. Leaning his hand on his head and smiling, Jill walked over and said he was glad to meet Hunter Hyun-soo. Hyun was surprised and asked Jill what he spoke in Korean. Jill, pointing to his head, replied that he could match long brainwaves. Jill turned around and said, "They weren't here to fight. They're here to get this guy." After bowing to Hyung, Takeshi introduced himself and said that as he had told Yurak earlier, they would apologize and make up for it. Hyung cried out, apologizing. He yelled and asked them what they would apologize for after this whole mess, thinking compensation could solve everything. Yurak tried to stop him with her arm outstretched, but Hyun replied that he needed to finish with that bastard, so let her get out of the way. But Yurak replied that Takeshi was the vice leader of the S-Guild and could be trusted. Since there were no casualties, we can call it a day. Nearby, Takeshi explained to Huxon that this was an open act of invasion. Even if an army was sent here, they could do nothing against them. With a slight nudge from Huxon, Takeshi said it was time for them to return. Huxon said nothing in response. Huxon looked back and called Hyun a baby and said they would finish next time, but for now, let Hyun be braver. Huxon rocketed into the sky without waiting for his comrades and headed home. Lifting his head to the sky and holding his head, Takeshi exhaled and thought they had averted another crisis. Turning to Hyun, Takeshi said he heard that Hyun is a class hunter. Whenever a strong hunter appears, it's worth celebrating. They turned around, and Jill waved his fist at him as they walked away, shouting that he hoped they'd get along and calling Hyung a kid. Hyung thought he was a kid. Crouching slightly, Jill began to apply the spell, and a portal appeared from his hands. Takashi had already gotten into the elevator, and Jill waved at Hyung, calling him boy again and shouting that they'd see each other again. Hyung was angry because he was 20 years old. Looking at Hyun, Yurak thought she only hoped he wouldn't die, but who would have thought he could fight Huxon as an equal? Yurak asked Park Hyun-soo how strong he had become. Hyun looked back at her. When Hyun came to the trauma center, the doctor told him that his wounds were healing much faster than expected and that everything would be gone by tomorrow. Leaning over to him, Yurak smiled and said that it looked like Hyung got stronger after eating the snake, to which Hyung replied, "Ha ha ha ha." Yurak said Hyung could sleep here if he was tired, but Hyung put on his jacket and said it was okay and that he'd sleep at home. Sitting in the train car, Demon asked why Hyun was using this instead of the Sky Demon flight. Hyun replied that it had been a hard day, and he wanted to take the subway. Leaning against the window, Hyun exhaled and thought that fighting next to ordinary people was dangerous, and people almost got hurt today. Lowering his head, he wondered what other people would think of him. Walking down the street, Hyun thought everyone must be worried about the devastation. But as he approached his house, he saw no ruined buildings. The whole street was polished to a shine. Someone behind his back called him by name and said he did a good job. Looking around, he saw a smiling Limina who said she was worried about him. Hyun asked Limon here, and she said the association has a team in charge of restorations. She explained that she was there with them to rebuild the neighborhood, and Hyun could only open his mouth in response. Throwing his arms around Limina, Hyun thanked her and said he was very worried on the way home. Seeing that he embarrassed Limina, Hyun bounced off her and apologized. Suddenly, people started coming onto the balconies, shouting that they welcomed him and that Hyun had saved their neighborhood. Scratching the back of his head and laughing embarrassedly, Hyun thanked the cheering crowd. In the White House, if you can call it that, a man was smoking a pipe and saying that the king was unhappy that the Watergate plan had gone awry. He added that all of this was due to misjudging the monsters. On one knee, a girl appeared in front of him and told him not to worry, as the fragment from the Western Sea of Korea should be enough. Sitting on the throne, the man asked if all was well with the parallel plan. Smiling, the girl replied that it was 78% complete, and if need be, the man could intervene personally and it would all be over. Smiling, the man replied that it was, but it was also good to see the progress of the plan. It was reported on television that Haxen Balder from Germany was behind the destruction of Dovan High School on the 12th. Also, in the news, it was reported that Balder illegally entered the country, tried to attack a hunter, and destroyed a school in the process. In the afternoon, Eskild officially apologized and said it would try to make up for the incident as soon as possible. While watching TV, Choi Jae-hyuk thought how cool it was. This news made him very happy. Standing, he thought how cool Hyun-soo was to have survived the White Wolf attack. Clenching his metallic hand into a fist, Jae-hyuk thought about how Noonim would look at him if he broke the neck of someone like Hyun-soo. Laughing, Jae-hyuk said in his mind that Hyun-soo should wait because they would meet again. Sitting at the table, Demon said that he could start cooking if Hyung was done washing up. Hyung replied from the bathroom that Demon should wait a little longer. Stepping out of the shower and toweling himself off, Hyun awed and said how refreshing it was. Demon asked how he dared to walk naked in front of his teacher, but Hyung asked what the big deal was because they were both men. Taking his phone, Hyung said the most remarkable thing about living alone is that you can walk out of the shower naked, but Demon slapped him. Putting down the phone, Hyun said they had an expedition tomorrow, so he ordered something special for them today. The surprised Demon asked what this something special was, but Hyun only looked back at him slyly and smiled. Sitting in the lotus posture, Demon asked if Hyun-soo would cook 2 packs of ramyeon. Turning to him, Hyun replied that he did not, and wondered if Demon was definitely his teacher. Demon asked what they were going to eat then, and Hyun sat down across from him, raised his index finger, and said it would be spicy pork and rice. Looking at the plates, Demon asked if this was better than ramyeon, but Hyun said they were too different to compare. Holding a small spoonful to Demon, Hyung asked him to taste it. When Demon tasted it, his cheeks puffed up and his eyes opened wide. Gingerly removing his spoon, Hyun asked what was wrong. Demon didn't like what was wrong, but Demon shouted, asking why Hyung had been feeding him ramyeon when there was such deliciousness. Hyung replied that he'd asked for it a minute ago. Coming to the office the next day, Hyung thought he would finally have his first official expedition. Smiling, he was glad that no one had ever thought he would become a red lion hunter. It was like a dream for him. Suddenly, someone called him newcomer, and Hyun looked around. He saw a man in front of him. The man introduced himself, said he was Sun Myung-jin, and said he was happy to meet him. Hyung shouted, "Wow!" Hyung held out his hand to keep it from shaking, and told Sun Myung that he was a fan. The man laughed and said it was embarrassing. Shaking hands, Sun Myung said that this was Hyung's first expedition, so they should try harder. Behind Hyun's back, Demon asked who it was that made his student almost faint. Hyung turned around and said it was a hunter. Hyung also said this hunter can't be broken and has saved many lives. Smiling, Hyun said that he had been a fan for a long time, but suddenly something he saw in front of him. A man with a cell phone was walking in front of him. Hyung saw the hunter, Ho Jun-sung. When Hyung approached him, he introduced himself and shook hands with Ho Jung-sung, who smiled and replied that he was glad to meet him. And the demon asked who it was. Hyung replied that he was a hunter. Even though he looked skinny, he had monstrous strength and was loved by many people. Suddenly, Demon slapped Hyun so hard that he drooled. Grabbing his head, Hyun asked what the demon was in for. Clenching his teeth, Demon asked if Hyun was their servant and why he was lowering his head so much. But Hyun replied that he was a fan, and there was no need to be so angry all the time. And Demon said he's the successor to the Sky Demon, and doesn't have to bow down to some Dick, Tom, or Harry. Even if it's not Murim, Hyung is still the heavenly demon's successor and will lead the divine cult. The demon told me to get this into my head. Jurak sat at her desk in the office. She looked sadly at a framed picture of herself with a man. When Hyung looked into the office, he told her that he heard her looking for him. Jurak confirmed it. Jurak said she had something to ask him, and Hyung looked at her and asked if it was an expedition outfit. But Jurak, instead of answering, said she would ask directly because they didn't have time. Hyung questioningly told her sorry. Getting closer, Jurak asked if Hyun would continue working with her. Worried, Hyun stammered, asking what she meant, and Jurak said he survived the battle against Haxon. Looking down at the floor, Jurak said that even though the grade showed that he had an A, maybe he was an A grade then. And pointing the finger at him, Jurak said he was an S-class hunter now. Stammering, he asked he S-class. Hyun couldn't believe it. Jurak reminded her she had promised to help before he became an S-class, and said that since there is no need for it now, this contract is invalid. Turning to Hyun, Jurak asked what he was going to do, and Hyun replied that, of course, he would stay with the Red Lions. Putting his hand on his chest, Hyun said that he still hadn't done anything for this guild, and he had, moreover, received a lot of money for this contract. Turning away, he frowned and said he wasn't that shameless. That made Jurak laugh. Warily taking Hyun by the shoulders, Jurak reminded him that this was his first expedition, so they should try harder. Jurak also said that if he went down to the basement, he'd find his outfit with his name on it and have to change. Hyung happily agreed. Standing in the aisle, Hyung bowed to her and told her he was going. When he came out into the hallway, he saw the demon and was scared. The demon looked at the student and asked why Hyung was so surprised that he had done something inappropriate. Hyung said that he had bowed unconsciously. And demon gave Hyung a slap on the wrist, saying that Jurak was his boss, not Tom, Dick, or Harry. Looking up, demon added that Jurak is all the more a good boss, and Hyung asked if demon knew the meaning of the word boss. Flying forward, demon replied that he watches news and dramas. So let's face it, he knows the meaning of the word. And Hyung laughed. The soldiers lined up in rows and were told to listen carefully. In front of them stood Jurak, who said it was time to get the fragment of heaven. Looking down, Jurak said that since they were going after the fragment of paradise, they would need high-level items and healing potions. Opening her arms, Jurak added that they would need courage to protect their comrades. The soldiers cheered and raised their fists in the air. Standing behind Hyun, demon revealed that although he had always found Jurak impressive today, she had shown herself as a heroine. Holding her palm forward, Jurak asked the soldiers to look at the comrade beside them and ask if they could protect them. Looking at each other, the soldiers smiled and shouted. Hearing the answer, Jurak raised her fist and shouted forward for the fragment. In the White House, a girl walked down the corridor. She knelt on one knee before the throne and announced that the Red Lion Expeditionary Force had just arrived. The man sitting on the throne asked her what their military strength was. Without raising her head, the girl replied that there were 30 more A classes besides the S-class Hayuraks. Standing up from his throne, the man told all A classes not to let their guard down for a second. With a wave of his cloak, the man said that the Red Lion would end today. The girl looked up and listened as he said that Korea would also disappear from the face of the earth. The sun was shining brightly over the sea. Suddenly, a funnel appeared in the water, and a ship sailed straight towards it. There was a group of Red Lions on the ship. The man behind Hyung said it was his first time in heaven. Looking at the portal, Sun Myung said that the first part of a two-part expedition had failed. All but the S-class had died. He added that although the second part was successful, more than 20 men were killed, and most of the squad was wounded. Sun Myung said that people go to heaven and die after they find out, and that's why the dream is called that. Hyun whined. The ship had already approached the portal. Sun Myung continued to say that people would start to shake with fear just by encountering a shard of heaven. The demon following Hyung said that something terrible awaited them at this gate. Frowning, Hyun thought that even if the teacher was saying something like that, the gate was incomparable to a normal gate. Before the portal, Jurak was enveloped in her flames, and she screamed that the key to saving humanity lay within that gate. The soldiers ran after their leader into the portal, shouting forwards. Coming out the other side of the portal, Hyun landed on one knee amidst the sand. Looking around the area, the demon said it was too vast to be an illusion. Hyung didn't understand and asked again. Demon said that when he was young, he almost died because of the price he had to pay for the illusion. Known as the Celestial Guardian Mystic Dimension Technique. Then Demon said that if it's an illusion, then they just need to find the thing that will unravel it and destroy it. Hyung looked around and realized that everyone had left, but Demon said someone was still there. It was Jae-hyuk. He scratched the back of his head and asked where everyone had gone. Pretending not to notice, Hyun Jae-hyuk said out loud that he was alone here. When Jae-hyuk saw the stone in front of him, he cried out that this diamond had at least 500 carats. Reaching for it, Jae-hyuk laughed, thinking he had won the jackpot. But as soon as he touched the stone, a monster with a lantern-shaped tail on its forehead at the end of which the diamond was hanging suddenly emerged from the sands. Dodging the monster's attacks, Jae-hyuk shouted that the alamat couldn't lie there. Jae-hyuk's hand was covered in lightning, and he shouted at the monster to try the rock destroyer. Jae-hyuk attacked the monster, but the beast had a tail like a scorpion with a deadly needle. Noticing the igloo, Jae-hyuk used a Spartan shield spell to take cover from the attack. Jae-hyuk held up his shield and called for the bone spear for help, then remembered that there were no spearmen in the expedition this time. Then Jae-hyuk decided that he would just use the rock breaker. Attacking the monster from above, he struck. At first he thought he had straightened out the monster, but then it roared, and Jae-hyuk saw how big it was. Extending his arms, Jae-hyuk used a double shield to defend himself against the monster. But the monster could attack, and Jae-hyuk flew into the sands, ramming the ditch. However, Hyun-soo came to the rescue and used an attack of seed strikes. Flying over the sea was Jurak, who immediately realized that everyone was scattered across the area as soon as they entered. She suggested that there was another one inside that gate. All Jurak saw as she flew was the vast sea. Stopping, Jurak decided to see if there was anything under the water. Applying a Hell Night spell, Jurak stretched her arms and dove into the water. The hunters in the mountains were fighting the monsters. Some of the group was already dead, but Sun Myung held up his weapon and shouted at them not to give up. He reminded them that as soon as they surrendered, their comrades would die. One of the hunters shouted, asking when they had told Sun Myung that they would surrender. As he struck the monster, the hunter shouted that he would return and receive a hefty bonus. Another hunter traded the moniker of Annihilation and shouted for monsters not to dare look down on A-ranked hunters. But suddenly one of the monsters bit that hunter's neck. The other hunter was also attacked. Sun Myung rushed to Jung Sung's aid, but the hunter told Sun Myung to stay away from him. Another monster pounced on Sun Myung from above. The hunter shouted that he was a steel god, and he wouldn't lose to something like monsters. But he was attacked by too many monsters, and Sun Myung Jin couldn't save himself. Seeing this, Jung Sung shouted that they didn't come here to die and grabbed the monster by the horn. The man watching saw it explode and laughed. The man sitting behind this girl was sipping coffee and said it would probably be over before he finished it. His partner said it was very boring because the gulag hadn't even come out yet, but the man replied that if it came out, it would be even more boring. The man asked the girl the name of the guy who killed Imagi and survived the battle with Huxon, and she said Park Hyun-soo. Taking the binoculars, the girl said that she didn't think he could defeat the Wizard King alone because she had picked him one of the strongest. Seeing the dead monster and the two men walking away, the girl said they had already met. While walking, Jae-hyuk told Hyung it must be fate since they met like this. Putting his hand on his heart, Jae-hyuk revealed that he almost cried when he thought he was the only one left out. Looking at him, Hyun thought the Aegis Guild leader always talked so much. Hitting his palm with his fist, Jae-hyuk said he knew there was an unseen hunter when Hyun defeated that giant monster in the battle with Huxon. The demon advised Hyun to hit Jae-hyuk once to shut him up, and Hyun laughed. Jae-hyuk went on to say that Hyun and Huxon didn't lose to him, that he watched all the videos, and that now he's a fan. The demon said he had to strike immediately, but Hyung said he couldn't. Jae-hyuk was surprised when he saw that. Jae-hyuk frowned, thinking that Hyung had looked up at the sky several times while they were talking. What's wrong with him? Jae-hyuk thought that when he entered the base, he saw Hyun's unique ability to listen to instructions and think nonsense. But now Jae-hyuk thought, if that's really the case, then whose instructions is Hyun-soo listening to? Hyun-soo's fighting style felt like something unrealistic martial art. And Demon informed Hyung that Jae-hyuk continued to watch him, and Hyung tensed up. The demon also warned Hyun to be careful because these grazes showed hostility towards him, and Hyun's face stretched in surprise. Jae-hyuk wondered who Hyung was listening to the martial arts instructions from, a ghost of sorts. When Hyung turned back to him, Jae-hyuk scratched his head and asked why he was looking at him like that. He was sweating from excitement. But Hyun looked forward and advised Jae-hyuk to do the same. They found themselves right in front of a portal. Jae-hyuk shouted it was the gate inside the gate. An association ship approached the empty Red Lion ship standing near the portal. The ship was led by Limina and her band of hunters. She informed everyone that the Red Lion and the Aegis Guild had entered the gate. clenching her fist. Limina said they would only join if they failed. An appraiser with equipment sat nearby and reported that Anderson's intensity was now 24. When it reached 100, the gate would collide. Looking at the gate mentally, Limina asked Hyun Sushi to be safe. Standing at the portal, Jae-hyuk asked Hyung to go in. But Hyung replied that they don't even know where they are now, so they should go in. Jae-hyuk said that since Hyung had doubts about it, he'd go first, and he took a step into the portal. Hyun shouted, but Jae-hyuk had already disappeared into the portal. But Demon said that Hyun should forget about him because now he can explore the area better with that noisy, snotty guy gone. Looking back at him, Hyun replied that he couldn't do that because they had come here as a team. Watching Hyun enter the portal, Demon asked how dare he ignore his teacher's words. When Hyung emerged from the other side of the portal, he started falling because they had emerged from the middle of the tower, while Jae-hyuk was already in the middle. But Hyung immediately used the heavenly demon flight, and he was able to climb to the top of this tower. Sitting on one knee, Hyun realized the portal was on top of the castle wall and couldn't see Jae-hyuk. Lowering his head, Hyung saw Jae-hyuk climbing up the wall, and he said Hyung was flying all over the place. When Jae-hyuk got up, Hyun helped him up. He said, "Hyun is so fast," and the guy laughed back. Looking ahead, Jae-hyuk said he thought they should go this way. Hyung looked the same way. A huge city spread out before them. Jae-hyuk said it was the first time he had seen civilization inside the portal. Jae-hyuk waved at Hyung and told him that he would go in that direction, and Hyung could go in the opposite direction and enter the castle from there. When Hyun turned around, Jae-hyuk stopped him and held out the red signal lights, saying that since communication didn't work here, we should take them. Looking at the torch, Hyung smiled, and Jae-hyuk said that if anything happened, Hyung should use it. When Jae-hyuk turned around and waved his hand, saying they would see each other, Hyung thought that was what he expected from the veteran. The castle Jae-hyuk and Hyung had gotten into was destroyed. Inside, a skeleton dressed as a king sat on a throne. Looking at the battlefield where there were dead hunters, the girl said that, apparently, the entire Red Lion A class had been completely wiped out. Her supervisor, who was reading the book, said he was bored just waiting and asked what about the other two. Looking through the binoculars, the girl reported that Hyunsu Park was approaching the ancient castle of Anthropia, and Ha-Yurak was fighting alone in the Sea of Obel. Looking at the mutant shark swimming at her, Yurak clenched her fists and shouted, "Let's go." Using a flame spell, the Mephisto Yurak screamed that she would burn them all. The mutant swam and swam toward her. Yurak thought they had no end but felt she couldn't leave them and walk away. Looking up, Yurak realized that the exit was gone as well. She saw only a crowd of monsters coming toward her. Yurak used a flame brush spell as she struck. Small monsters surrounded her from all sides. Suddenly, a vast monster floated above her. It made her look like a small glowing ball of light. As he continued to walk along the castle wall, Jae-hyuk felt that no matter how much he walked, the wall would not end. Looking down, he thought he should just go downstairs, and he started sliding down the wall. It was very slippery, but Jae-hyuk stuck his fingers into the castle wall and stopped rolling down. Looking at the boarded-up houses, Jae-hyuk sarcastically said that nothing was likely to happen in this beautiful place. As Jae-hyuk stretched out his palm, a blue ball of light appeared above her, and he asked it to show him where the precious items were. From the balloon, a blue haze appeared, leading along the entire street of destroyed houses and pointed somewhere in the distance. Following the light, Jae-hyuk thought he had gotten a rock destroyer with it, and he wondered what would happen this time. Hyung was walking along the wall, and a demon was following him. Hyung looked at the abandoned city and said that no one was there, and something seemed to have happened. And Demon said he felt something alien and huge. They both looked up. Suddenly, there was an explosion where Hyung and Demon had just been. And a dusty, giant skeleton king leaned over to them and asked them if they were trying to enter the Gate of Light. Standing before the skeleton in his castle, Hyun listened to the king thank them for accepting his invitation and said he had something to ask them. Leaning forward slightly, the skeleton asked, "They came here through the Gate of Light." And Hyung replied that if the skeleton meant a portal, they had come through it. The skeleton didn't understand what a portal was and asked again. Suddenly, Demon said that the skeleton seemed to be able to see him. Hyung looked at him questioningly, but the skeleton himself answered his question by saying he could see him. Pointing his finger at Hyung, the skeleton said he was a sorcerer controlling souls, and Hyung waved his hand and said no. Snapping his fingers, the skeleton said that since they were their guests, let them have tea, and 2 tables with mugs of tea appeared in front of Hyun. But Demon, looking at the skeleton, asked the king. Hyun looked back at the teacher. Taken aback, the skeleton replied that he didn't know because he remembered everything vaguely. He told Hyung and Demon that he had lived for about 283 years. Then he reported that he was taking 10 years in a year, and Hyun cringed when he realized it was over 2,000 years. Watching Hyun sit down at the table and Demon standing there, the skeleton asked why they didn't drink tea, as they said it could increase mana reserves. The skeleton also said he served it because he hadn't had a guest in a long time. After taking the mug and sipping it, Hyung thanked him for the tea and then thought to Mana, "Is that something edible?" Watching the student drink, Demon asked if it was poisoned, and Hyun immediately spit it out. Raising his index finger, Demon said he would eat it if Rayon were in there. Looking around the castle, Demon said it was messy and asked what was wrong. The skeleton coughed. Looking at the skeleton, Hyun clenched his teeth and asked the teacher to forgive him for being rude, but the skeleton replied that it was okay. And the skeleton said he was happy to talk to someone. Hyung was silent in response. Skeleton started saying that he was probably the king of this place, and Demon noted that at least he looked appropriate. Starting his story, the skeleton said that this country was the envy of all. Happiness here was guaranteed to those who worked hard. But one day, unexpectedly, a gate of light began to appear. All kinds of monsters started coming out of there, and panic started. The skeleton didn't remember if he was king or not. This enraged the demon, who shouted for the skeleton to just say he was the king. Hyung sipped his tea and thought he was even wearing a crown. The skeleton said that he was sure he could use magic back then, so he used everything he had. The skeleton's eyes lit up, and he screamed to destroy them all. A giant ogre-like monster came out to the dead soldiers on the battlefield. It picked up Young Sung's lifeless body. Turning to Night Nim, the girl said that the gulag had awakened. The man replied that he was a lazy degenerate, and that was very disappointing. Looking at the leader, the girl asked what they would do, and Night Nim said there was nothing to do but gather everything in one place. In the sea, Yurak continued to fight the huge monster. When she turned around, she realized it would be difficult because it was still chasing her. But suddenly, Yurak saw a portal and rushed towards it. In the portal, she saw a gulag monster. She didn't understand how a portal inside another portal was possible. And the sea poured out of the portal onto the gulag. The monster looked around, uncomprehending. In the castle, Hyung, sitting at the table, listened as the skeleton told how he still couldn't destroy all the monsters. Hyung asked what happened next. The skeleton replied that he had woken up like this. Clutching his head, the skeleton wondered what had happened to his people. After hearing the story, Hyun said he didn't know how to comment. Looking down, the skeleton said that it seemed they had come to kill him, and asked me to finish him off. The demon didn't understand and asked again, and Hyun wondered if the skeleton wasn't already dead. Climbing out of the water, Yurak realized that the two portals overlapped. Then Yurak lowered her head and saw the lifeless bodies drenched in water. It was her squad. At the exact moment, a snarling gulag emerged from the water. The girl watching from the hill shrieked, happy that the monster and Jurak had finally met. Turning to Night Nim, the girl asked who he would bet on. The man, lying on a chaise lounge with a book on his face, replied that, of course, he would bet on the gulag. Looking at the gulag, Yurak clenched her fist and shouted, asking if it was his handiwork. Switching into Firebird mode, Yurak screamed for all the bastards to die. Gulag roared in response that a giant monster whale appeared out of the water, and an explosion occurred. Looking down after the explosion, Yurak saw that all the gnats were dead, and only the gulag remained. She rushed to attack the monster, screaming that it was his turn. Standing before the skeleton, the demon interjected, meaning he wanted them to straighten him out. He then asked the skeleton itself, "Can't it?" Hearing Hyung call Demon a teacher, the skeleton said that no one thought Hyung would take a soul as a teacher. He thought it was ridiculous. Standing up from his throne, the skeleton grabbed his staff and struck his head with it. The crown fell on the throne, leaving only the armor on it, Hyun asked. The skeleton just crushed his own skull. But suddenly the crown rose into the air, and the pieces of the skull came together. The skeleton said he had tried this many times, but each time he had been resurrected. He added that he no longer remembered the curse on him and asked to be spared the pain of being alone. The demon said he would deal with the skeleton then, and Hyun shrieked at the teacher. Coming closer, Demon folded his arms across his chest and said he had one condition. At this time in the forest, Jaehyuk followed the glowing light. The orb led him to some abandoned building, and Jaehyuk wondered where he was. Realizing that there was something inside, Jaehyuk decided that he would just break down the door in that case and go in. Jaehyuk burst through the door and entered an empty, huge hall. Something glowed in the center of it. To Jaehyuk, this ancient structure looked ridiculous. He reached the stairs leading down and shrieked. Turning around, he saw that the gargoyles he had passed had come to life. When Demon finished speaking, he said that was his only condition, and the skeleton asked again, meaning he wanted to know how to get out of there. Hyun raised his index finger and told the teacher that they just needed to enter the portal through which they had come. And Demon slapped Hyun. Hyun cried and screamed for what, and Demon called him a stupid asshole because the portal was gone. Demon also said that one should always remember where the exit is from the place one is in. Listening instructions were activated, and Hyun responded well. Skeleton said he didn't know how to get out of there, but if he had, he would have done it by now. Standing up from his throne, the skeleton said he knew something to help them, and he started climbing up the spiral staircase above. Hyun and Demon followed him. While climbing up, Demon told Hyun that the skeleton might be up to something, so they should be on guard. They went to the door, and Hyun thought it unlikely that the skeleton would harm them. Taking his staff, the skeleton said, "The gate will open with the power of mana, and the stone in the center of the staff will shine with light." When the gate opened, Hyun asked what kind of energy it was because it was different from the chi the teacher used. Demon answered that he didn't know because he had never experienced anything like it. They went into the hall, and the door slammed shut behind them. They stood around the vessel, and the skeleton said that this temple's name was Entropy, and nothing in the world could compare to it. Walking over to the vessel, on top of which was a glowing orb, Hyun looked at the skeleton, and the skeleton told him to put his hand on the orb. Skeleton says he doesn't know what the orb will show him, but whatever it is, it's what Hyun truly desires. Turning back to Demon, Hyun heard him say that it was pointless to doubt after he had gotten this far. At first, Hyun thought that the teacher himself had told him to be on guard, but then he decided to touch the ball. Saying, "Let's try." Hyun put both hands on the orb, and the light from it swirled around the hunter. A vortex began to form around the ball, and Hyun shouted to the teacher that it looked like the ball was pulling him in. Unable to get his hands off, Hyun shouted that the skeleton had tricked them. The skeleton laughed and apologized for lying. Bending over the balloon, Hyun kept yelling at the teacher, saying he couldn't get his hands off. Looking up at the skeleton, the demon asked why he did it, and the skeleton replied that he wanted to get out of there just like them. The skeleton also said that, after a long search, he had learned the ability to manifest a gate of light, but he didn't have enough energy. And when they arrived, the skeleton had a hunch that the time was right. Shouting, Hyun called the skeleton a scumbag for tricking him. The skeleton said that he absorbed all the souls of the people living in the city and defeated the monsters, but because of this, he ended up alone. And there was no more energy he could muster. And then they were joined with the energy of thousands of people. Skeleton said he wouldn't ask where they got the energy from since it would be his anyway. Looking at the skeleton, Demon told Hyun to calm down because the martial arts he taught him would help him. The listening instructions were activated, and the demon told Hyun to use the heavenly demon's dominant move. And Hyun thought Demon was right. He panicked too much because he couldn't move his hands. Everything is deflected before the heavenly demon, and Hyun uses a dominant move. The temple they were in exploded, and part of the castle blew to pieces. Falling to his knees, the skeleton saw the orb lying on the floor and wondered what was happening. A foot stepped on the rolling ball. Hyun stood in front of the skeleton. He looked at him sternly, and the demon's shadow could be seen behind him. The skeleton asked how Hyun dared bring him to his knees. But the demon answered his question, saying that this is how everyone should behave before the heavenly demon. The skeleton called them brats, but Hyun had already jumped and struck the skull with a base-destroying force. Following that, Hyun applied a wood strike, and the skeleton's skull cracked, shattering into pieces. In another castle, one of the revived monsters jumped on Jaehyuk. Against his attack, Jaehyuk used a Spartan shield, but many monsters were surrounding the hunter. Looking around, Jaehyuk thought there was no end to them, so he decided it was time to run away. Rushing with all his legs, Jaehyuk fell into a pit right in the center of the hall. As he flew, he saw huge sharp spikes sticking out from the bottom, and he flew straight at them. Managing to get a grip on the wall, Jaehyuk tried to climb up. As he climbed out, he was breathing heavily and thought he had just almost died. He raised his head and saw his glowing orb flying around the ice rock. Rejoicing, Jaehyuk flew with his fists at this ice statue and shattered it. The skeleton's crown fell to the floor with a clang, but Demon told Hyun there was more to it. The skeleton rose again and stood towering over them. Hyun was angry that even a direct blow from a tree didn't help. Lifting the crown, the skeleton said it wasn't bad for a brat like Hyun. After returning the crown to its proper place, the skeleton said that Hyun was just a speck of dust to him. Raising his staff high, he said it looked like Hyun's teacher could do something, and laughed. Looking at the apprentice with his side vision, Demon told him to look at his back. Hyun looked behind him and saw a ball of light coming from the skeleton staff. Looking up, Hyun decided there was no need to panic and used the heavenly demon materialization. The skeleton attacked him, shouting that Hyun was just a slimy slug. Hyun dodged the blows with great speed. The floor beneath Hyun's feet split into slabs and started walking from side to side, so the hunter used the heavenly demon flight. A chasm formed under his feet, and Hyun grabbed hold of one of the remaining slabs and paddled right over it. Holding the staff and his energy ball in his hand, the skeleton concluded that Hyun wouldn't last long, and the demon told the apprentice to go up because he was sure he could. Hyun jumped to the surface with one hand hooked and landed on one knee. Seeing this, the skeleton said he was amused that Hyun was using such tricks against him, but Demon advised him to shut up. Looking at the skeleton from above, Demon said that he was an insect here. Did he think he would dare compete with him on this level? And the demon added that the insect should not dare to reach the heavens, for he is heaven. And the skeleton said that's very arrogant. Demon's just a soul who can't even go to the bathroom. However, the demon was not hurt by this and said he could be arrogant because he was in heaven. Growling, the skeleton said it would wipe his student to powder and show that there was always someone stronger in the world. Like a spider, the skeleton aimed laser beams from its energy ball at Hyun. After dodging them, Hyun rushed out. He thought that even though the skeleton had destroyed the floor, pillars were still in the hall. Throwing himself at the nearest column, Hyun shouted a piercing shout and then used a killing blow. The floor beneath the skeleton collapsed, and he flew down, not realizing what was happening. There was a gem in the ice prison. When Jae-hyuk saw it, he said, "So there you are." Taking the stone off the cast, Jae-hyuk squeezed it and said aloud that he would devour it. As the skeleton fell, he screamed it was a joke with a fragment like this. Jumping from rock to rock, Hyun ran at the skeleton to deliver a decisive blow to the enemy. Taking the crystal, Jae-hyuk shouted. He didn't understand how it could be that this power surpassed a class. The skeleton realized something had happened. He said someone had touched his life vessel. At this time, Hyun ran at him while applying the heavenly demon wiping fists, second part 6 technique. After pushing off with tremendous force, Hyun flew towards the skeleton using the heavenly spiritual body. The vessel in Jae-hyuk's hand was bursting. He screamed with unbearable tension. His armor shattered into shards. He clenched his teeth and held up the vial in his hand. When Hyun struck, the skeleton thought he would win if someone didn't take his life fragment. As the skeleton crumbled, thousands of souls he had ruined with a scream broke free. Bending down, Jae-hyuk fell to his knees and leaned on his hands. There was smoke everywhere. He absorbed the vessel and grew stronger. As he pushed off, he shattered the temple floor and flew upward. The monsters from which Jae-hyuk had escaped were waiting for him on the floor above. Watching them, Jae-hyuk thought that this time it was different and what he should do. Clenching his fist, Jae-hyuk smiled broadly. Such power drove him crazy. As the monsters rushed to attack him, Jae-hyuk extended his arm and destroyed them all in one fell swoop. Jae-hyuk felt his body feel better now and smiled evilly. Standing among the flying souls, Hyun asked what demon was talking about. He wants to go inside. Kneeling down in front of the ball, Hyun said that he felt something go through his body when he picked it up. At that moment, he heard countless people screaming for help. They were begging to be let go. Turning to Demon, Hyun said that he would return himself, and that Demon should stay in the castle and wait for him. Then, Demon asked what would have happened if Hyun hadn't returned. The disciple looked at him and said that he should do it. Looking at him, Demon said Hyun is a stubborn brat, and the guy said that's why he's going. When Hyun touched the balloon, Demon put a hand on his shoulder, and Hyun looked around. The demon asked him what to sit and wait for if he failed. Hyun smiled and replied that they were one in body and soul. Saying, "Well, let's go," Hyun put his other hand on the balloon, which glowed with light. On a city street, a young couple stood looking at the sun. Hyun thought that was it. At least the inhabitants in the town were similar to the place before the destruction. Hyun thought maybe it was the Lich's memories. A vast circle shone over the city. When the locals saw it, they ran away because they knew it was the Gate of Light. Giant monsters came out of the portal and took the lives of people on the spot. The people rushed to tell the king. The city guards shouted that we should not run away but fight the monsters. They wielded their spears and tried to protect the population. Flying on a dragon, the king shouted to the warriors to retreat. The residents rejoiced at the king's appearance, and the king shouted for everyone to move away from the monsters. Applying the spell, the king said, in honor of Mori and with the spirit of Jabogaro touching the heavens. The king used the impact spells from the heavens and began destroying the monsters. Overnight, the king destroyed the monsters, and in the daytime, flying over the city, the warriors shot it happily, waving their spears. The emboldened king returned to the castle to recover from a rough night. The king took the potion and sat down with his head down. He thought that if he continued like this, he would be destroyed, so he drank it. He drank and realized he no longer had the strength to fight. He thought, what good would the world be if he died? Sitting on his throne, he pondered that no one could stop the monsters from the Gate of Light but him. By constructing a logical chain, the king concluded that he was the country, which meant that he had only one option. He decided to use necromancy, a sorcery that allowed the king to collect people's souls and absorb their vast amounts of power. But then the king thought he must be crazy. How can a country be called a country if there are no people in it? Hitting his fist on the throne, the king thought he could create another country if he lived. Two opinions were fighting in him. One was that he should use necromancy, and this place would soon disappear, and the other was that he would take people's lives. The people seemed to gather around the one with the power in his hands, but what kind of king would go to such a brutal massacre of his own people? The king broke the potion jug and fell to the floor, stirring like a madman. At that moment, a guard came to him and reported that a gate of light had appeared at the eastern wall of the castle. The man said there was a giant monster like a dragon. Silently, the man asked, stammering, "Your Majesty." The king stood up and began to shout. He yelled that people were always asking him for things, and that the only thing people did was whine all the time. That's when he told the messenger he'd give their lives some value. When the king's spear pierced him, the last thing the man said was, "Why?" The king replied that his blood would not be spilled in vain and began to use necromancy. He summoned all who relate to the man and all who relate to them. The king decided to take all men's souls for eternity and gain unprecedented power. Raising his spear upward, the king screamed. His eyes turned red. Souls filled his body. A necromancer's seal appeared over the chapel that day, enveloping the entire town. The souls of the townspeople left their bodies and flew into the air. The streets were filled with lifeless bodies of people, and the souls rushed to the king. He felt himself growing stronger with each soul. Having become several times larger, the king took to the city streets to fight the monsters. He was determined never to lose to any monster from the Gate of Light again. Watching the monster that attacked him, the king said that the kingdom of Rayord is eternal. Standing with his ears closed, Hyun could still hear the souls of people screaming and asking where they were. Someone saying they had to get married tomorrow, or asking for help. Clenching his teeth, Hyun told the teacher that he could hear all the pain of souls. He screamed what he should do about it. Looking at him, Demon replied that this was precisely why he had told him not to come in. Clenching his fist, Demon called Hyun a useless bastard and said that this needed to be endured, and since he was here, Hyun could do it. The souls shouted for Hyun to go to them too, and asked why he alone had a body. They asked Hyun to become one of them. Hyun's mouth drooled and he went somewhere. Hyun saw a glowing spot in front of him. He looked at the teacher and asked what it was. But the demon wasn't there. Hyun started to panic and looked around, but he couldn't find him. The glowing spot beckoned Hyun to come to it. Hyun walked up to it and through it. The voice said, "Park Hyun, so you did a great job." Coming out the other side of the portal, Hyun found himself in front of a ghost sitting on a throne and asked who he was. The ghost wore a crown on his head, but his face was not visible. The ghost stroked Hyun's head and said that Hyun had suffered so much because of those souls. Hyun screamed, but suddenly he found himself on a city street. He saw a crowned elder sitting in front of him. Not believing his eyes, Hyun asked if he was the skeleton, and the king praised him for recognizing him. But Hyun clenched his fists and shouted that he was a scumbag and trying to cheat everyone again. But the king asked how Hyun could say such a thing, for he had waited 3,024 days for this moment. The king also said the skeleton wasn't the only one waiting for a strong man from the outside world, and Hyun noted that there was a different time frame before that. But the king replied that the skeleton had given up about halfway through, and Hyun asked if it was the same person. The king said yes and no. He said that when he used necromancy, he gave up his evil self and immersed himself in entropy. But he was just thrown out of his body. But the king pulled himself together and created a world in another dimension. So he also saved a few souls and helped them heal here. Though every day is the same for them, they don't suffer pain. Looking at Hyun, the king asked, what was that look? It was offensive to him. And then the king said he'd seen the first time in 3,000 years that he'd heard the instructions, and Hyun was very surprised. He shouted, asking how the king knew this, but the old man only smiled. Then he said that Hyun might not feel insulted because they don't have time. Then the hunter shouted that it would be anyway, but what about in time? Pointing his finger at the king, Hyun turned around and asked the teacher what he should do to him if he could hit him. But Demon still wasn't around, and the king said he had called his teacher here. Yi Hyun asked if it was possible, and the king said that listening to the instructions was necessary. Hyung asked him to stop saying that. The king explained that his evil self kept the source of their life separate from their body to live a life close to eternal. But Hyung and the other person who came here from the outside world took the vessel of life. Hyung realized it was Choi Jae-hyuk. The king also revealed that that man is now looking for Hyun, and that he has become another reincarnation of evil. The king said that Jae-hyuk was not the man Hyun knew before, and warned that Jae-hyuk would try to take his life. After thinking about why it was happening now, Hyung sat in the lotus position and said that he understood everything. So let's move on quickly. The king said that they had a great relationship, and that Hyung should make him his teacher. Hyung was surprised that he knew that too. Listening instructions were activated, and the designated person was the caster king. The two boxes were still near the portal to the sea. The evaluator told Limina that Anderson's intensity had risen to 63. Lowering her head, Limina thought that the only thing she could do was just wait here. But Limina was prepared to give her life in the event of a portal impact. Fighting the gulag, Yurak Firebird sweated towards him and applied Hell Knight. Approaching him, Yurak screamed that she would finish him off with everything she had. Drowning the monster in the sea, Yurak floated to the surface. But the gulag didn't die and got out of the water. Yurak was surprised to see him, for it was an attack she had put all her strength into. The king said that he used all his power to create this world, so Hyung will need to learn mana control to free the people. Gathering the energy in his hands, Hyun asked mana of something like chi. The king said that chi is the purified energy of nature and mana is the raw. The king raised his hands to the sky and told Hyun to absorb the mana in its original form. Listening for instructions was activated, and Hyun inhaled mana. Something shone in the sky, and it was like hail was falling on Hyung. Hyung asked if it was mana. The voice said that Hyun understood natural mana, and his points increased. With his mouth hanging open, the king wondered how this was possible. He was the best magician in the world, and it took him 3 hours to get a mana breath. Looking at Hyun, the king thought that even if he had been instructed to listen to instructions, he was still an outstanding genius. Continuing to sit, Hyun said that since he could sense mana, what's next? The king replied that it's not difficult. And the king began to explain that Hyun needed to take control of all the souls inside this body. The king also warned that Hyun would probably feel the pain of each soul. He just needed to bring back all their pain. Sitting composedly near the balloon, Hyun heard footsteps coming from behind him. It was Jae-hyuk, who said he was just looking for Hunter Park Hyun-soo. Realizing that Hyun wasn't answering or moving, Jae-hyuk asked him if he was asleep. Smiling, Jae-hyuk began using the spell and said he was sorry because he wanted to see what Hyun-soo could do. Hyun said he feels like his heart is going to burst. It's because of the mana. He asked the king what to do next. The king replied that he had to be careful because there would be no second chances. Hyun had to put mana into each word and say, "Get lost." Being somewhere in space, Demon realized that vengeful spirits and wondered if his apprentice had done it. Suddenly, someone told Demon that Park Hyun-soo must be an unprecedented genius. Seeing an old man in front of him wearing a crown, Demon asked if he was the skeleton. The old man replied that his disciple had accomplished a remarkable feat. He and his people were finally destroyed and free. And Demon asked what he meant by destroyed, meaning completely gone. And the old man answered exactly. After disappearing, the king told Demon he'd appreciate it if he told Hyung that they'd all gained their freedom. Meanwhile, Jae-hyuk would say goodbye to Hyung while he was still awake. At the last moment, Hyung opened his eyes and saw what Jae-hyuk was about to do. There was an explosion in the tower. Standing before Hyun, who had managed to evade the attack, Jae-hyuk said he was finally awake. He added that it was just fine because he would be bored to take his life like that. With his arm out, Jae-hyuk decided to attack again and told Hyun they were saying goodbye now. But Hyun was quicker and knocked his opponent off his feet. Jae-hyuk didn't realize what it was and didn't know how he hadn't noticed it with such strength. Hyung's next blow was even more decisive. So much so that Jae-hyuk broke through the tower wall and flew out into the street. But Jae-hyuk didn't want to believe it and thought it was because he hadn't used that power yet. Behind him, Hyun jumped out of the tower, swinging his fist at the enemy. Falling down, Jae-hyuk thought he was the strongest. He had reached S-class. His anger made saliva spurt out of his mouth. With his arms wide open, Jae-hyuk shouted to show Hyun all the power he had gained. Looking at his enemy, Hyun felt the power of the Caster King and realized that Jae-hyuk had indeed absorbed his power. and Hyung shouted that he couldn't just let him go like that. They got into a fight. Hyun's punch was so strong that Jae-hyuk tensed up and thought it was ridiculous. The next blow came to Jae-hyuk's left, and Hyun told him he was still distracted during the battle. The last blow in the air hit Jae-hyuk in the jaw, and he fell to the ground with a thud. Falling with the tower's debris, Jae-hyuk could not lift his hand out from under the rubble. With effort, he did get his arm out, and only his legs were left to reach. But this time, Hyun was already flying at him with a seed strike attack, and the enemy went flying into the woods, tumbling downhill. He never moved again. Standing on the wall, Hyun told the teacher he was overflowing with energy. The mana power the king had taught him synergized with his internal energy. Closing his eyes, Hyun said that he could even beat Huxin in this state if he came to his soul again. Looking at the apprentice, Demon smiled and said he had acknowledged it. Demon said that the power he senses in Hyung is comparable to the highest peak level of the world where he used to live. Noticing the student looking at him suspiciously, Demon asked what he was staring at. Hyun said he was praising him more than usual. The demon shouted that he scolded him. Hyung doesn't like praising him either, but at least he likes something. Looking at the teacher's angry face, Hyung asked why he was always so angry. Hyung didn't say what he didn't like. After giving Hyung a flick, Demon turned away and said they'd see if Hyung got more praise. Hyun looked at his hands and saw the man coming out of them. The demon smiled and said that Hyung had become weak again. At that moment, Hyun realized that mana couldn't be used and stored for long, just like chi. Looking up into the sky, Hyun and Demon saw a portal to the sea and above it, an explosion. Recognizing the flying fire comet as the head of the guild, Hyun thought, "What the hell is this? And what is she doing here?" Reading the book, Night Nim asked the king caster to lose and escape from Anthropia, and the girl confirmed his words. Night Nim said that if the Gulag loses, this place will be destroyed even though they tried their best to avoid it. Slamming the book shut, Night Nim sighed and said the Gulag would never lose. Even if the Caster King's two sides are united, they cannot defeat him, not to mention the other warriors. Taking up the hilt of his sword, Night Nim said that in that case, he would take care of the remaining bugs. The picture in the portal changed to sands and scorpion monsters, and Demon said it seemed to be where they had started. Looking at the portal, Hyun didn't understand how many portals were gathered in one place. Someone answered his question by saying it's called an overlap. Hyun looked around sharply and asked who was there. He saw a white-haired girl holding an umbrella. Smiling madly, the girl told Hyun that he was upsetting Night Nim with his existence. A demon standing nearby warned the apprentice that he felt bloodlust. With two fingers pointing to her heart, the girl said, "Get it." Thorns appeared from the ground around Hyun. However, Hyun disappeared from where he had just stood, and the spikes did not touch him in any way. Continuing to smile, the girl thinks Hyun is so fast that a residual image appears. Smiling, Demon thought to himself, what a disciple. Hyun used mana to instantly increase his strength. The voice said that Hyung was testing the mana he had absorbed. He decided to attack the opponent with his seed. But the girl opened her umbrella and was able to block the attack. Lifting his head, Hyun thought she was mocking him if she blocked the seed strike with an ordinary umbrella. When she landed on the wall, the girl said Hyung was horrible. How could he do that to a weak girl like her? Yi Hyun used the demon flight to reach the opponent. As the girl watched him, she thought about what a unique movement technique it was. Swinging his fist, Hyun told her to answer why she attacked him. The girl pointed at something with her fingers and asked why she should answer when he was running with that face. She snapped her fingers and stone spikes reappeared from the ground, but Hyun easily overcame them and shouted what she was carrying. He then applied a free kick. Running away from the attacks with her back against the wall, the girl laughed and yelled, "I don't get it! I don't get it!" A light shone from the side of her and she turned around to look at it. At that time, Hyun attacked her. Even though she opened her umbrella, the impact still hit her and she flew backward. Night caught her, and the girl turned around and apologized to him, saying that she must have underestimated the man. Now the enemy's chances of victory tipped the scales because there were two. Turning to Hyung Knight, Nim said that all he had to do was exhaust the king of the caster. Hyung asked him who he was. Instead of answering, Night Nim continued to say that at least that was what he had planned based on their information and what Hyung had shown. There's no doubting his strength, but Hyun clenched his fists and shouted again that he had asked who he was. Attacking Hyun, Night Nim told him not to worry about it because he would die soon. When the opponent threw a punch, Hyun could block the attack by placing a block from his hands. Still flying backward, Hyun thought his opponent was fast and strong. Peeking out from behind her umbrella, the girl smiled and showed him her heart again with her fingers. Now Hyun was flying towards the stone spikes that had appeared behind his back. Hyun landed on top of them and cried out. His mouth was bleeding. At this time, the gulag attacked Yurak and roared. As it flew up on its wings, the monster screamed its name. Yurak thought gulag was something like his name. It seemed to her that the monster was also taking the battle seriously. Standing right before the monster, Yurak turned off the Firebird mode. The beast looked at her questioningly. Yurak smiled and said that it didn't matter which of them died. They must know each other's names to know whose hand they fell. Standing up straight like a soldier, the huntress said she was Yurak of the Red Lion. And then Yurak screamed that she swore in the name of her fallen comrades that she would destroy him. A fireball appeared in her hands, and she shouted that she would destroy it with all her power. Several eyes were on the gulag's back, and the monster roared again. Most S-class hunters have techs that will take their lives in exchange for incredible strength. They were techniques that used life energy as fuel, and Yurak screamed for the plasma to incinerate the place. The huntress's eyes glowed red. At this time, the assessor yelled that Anderson's density had already reached 85 and was going up. Limina, standing in front of the portal, felt it was about to explode, but she realized that they wouldn't stand a chance even if S-Class couldn't stop it. Limina's phone rang, and she picked it up. She told the department head that the density was already 85. Looking at the portal, she replied that she didn't think they could take it. Then she asked from the perimeter, and then she realized no backup was coming and asked what they should do. But the supervisor reassured her that someone was on their way to help, and they were amazing people, so there was hope. Looking up, the hunters didn't realize what it was or what was happening. An object that looked like a falling meteorite was quickly approaching their ship. It landed on the ship with a rumble, and Limina covered her face with her hands at the last moment. When the smoke cleared, Limina saw Huxon in front of her. She certainly hadn't expected that. Huxon was asked at the S-Guild office if he would accept Korea's request. Jill asked Huxon what he thought of going alone. The man lowered his head. Raising his index finger, Takeshi said that Huxon would be helping Yurak in that case, and he seemed to hate that girl. Also raising a finger, Huxon said he'd only help if needed, and if they found someone else, he'd stay. Takeshi and Jill listened to Huxon say that hunters are needed to save people. Huxon took to the sky at nuclear speed without waiting for an answer. Stuffing his hands in his pocket, Takeshi sighed and said he loved it when Huxon acted heroic, and Jill said they couldn't fall behind. The estimator said Anderson's density is already 89. If this continues, the portal will explode in half an hour. Standing before Huxon, Limina explained that the portal contained 30 A-class hunters and the guild leader, Yurak. A new portal opened, and Takeshi and Jill came out. Limina thought there was still hope. Huxon initially asked where Park and Limina didn't understand, but Huxon explained that he meant Park Hyun-soo, and Limina replied that Hyun-soo was also in since he was from this guild. Huxon extended his hand to interrupt her, and said that was enough. Turning to the portal, Huxon said that if this kid is inside, it will be okay because he has more than just abilities. Through the plasma, Yurak stabbed the gulag in the eye sockets located on its back. Gulag howled in pain, and Yurak picked up a flaming sword and attacked him. Looking at what's happening in the portal, Demon said that that female firecracker is using her crowning technique. Behind him stood the injured Hyung. He said that if he hadn't gathered mana and chi and strengthened it with defense power, he would have died already. Demon slapped his student again and asked why he was covered in blood. Hyung almost fell down. Taking care of his wound, Hyun asked Demon to be gentle with him and then asked what he was doing there. Demon said Yurak was trying to finish the battle. Night Nim and his partner ran at him, asking how Hyun dared to be distracted during the battle. Listening instructions were activated, and the demon advised Hyun to use the In-Young demon. Yi Night Nim tried to land a strike on his opponent, but Hyun dodged it easily. When he saw that Hyun had dodged Knight's attack, he was puzzled and decided to do something different. The opponent flew over Hyun, and he realized that his attacks were impossible to predict. He decided on the right to use a leaf punch to block. When Hyun used the attack, an explosion occurred, and Night Nim flew off. Watching Hyun Knight fly out of the smoke, Nim clenched his fists and was angry that the hunter could also read this attack. A blade appeared in front of Hyun, and he used the leaf strike to cut. When he saw the attack, Nuit Nim realized it was dangerous and needed to dodge it. He flew up and avoided being hit. At this time, Yurak attacked the gulag with her sword in the portal. A voice told her that she was almost at her limit and needed to stop releasing energy. When Yurak collided with the monster, there was a massive explosion, and a shockwave enveloped the area. Sparks flew in the air when it was over, and Yurak began falling. Her fiery hair turned black as a raven's wing. An explosion rang out in the city streets, and cars flew upwards. It was an attacking monster. This monster attacked Yurak. He threw a car at her, and she managed to dodge it. Suddenly, a man landed right in front of the huntress. Yurak recognized him and said, "Captain." The captain patted her on the head and told her she'd done a good job, even though he was apparently late.